What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto wasn't born for glory, but carved his own throne in blood? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Upon a bed with silken sheets, illuminated by light from all corners of the room, sat a boy. A child, really, one that kicked his feet idly as he waited for his father to come. In some ways, this setting could be seen as rather odd, but this was simply how it was for the boy. It was morning after all, and he had to wait for breakfast. The child let out a small tune to amuse himself, humming whatever came to mind and trying to pass the time. Most children would find themselves bursting with energy, probably even anxious, but the boy's father had always impressed the importance of being patient. If his father was late, then he must have been busy. Perhaps he was even getting him another treat. As if summoned by the boy's desire for sweet and savory things, the door to the pale room opened, and in filtered several masked guards. Some were taller, others were shorter, but, in truth, they all looked the same, faceless. They spread along the side of the door opening and stood silent and stalwart. Then, his father entered with a slow gait. The man was slightly shorter than the average height, had dull hair, and seemed to put extra weight on his left leg. That was to be expected when the man was forced to use a cane. Yes, this was the happy boy's father, and the tiny glint of warmth in the man's eyes was for the boy and the boy alone. "Naruto, come, it's time for you to eat. We've found something new that you might enjoy." As the blonde youth was beckoned, he hopped off his bed and joined his father as they both were followed by the quiet soldiers. The father and son walked through winding paths, one silent and the other humming quietly. Their trek continued until they came upon a large room with a metal table and an odd machine. The instrument seemed hunched over, tubes flowing from its front and a slight whirring noise that emanated from within it. Aesthetically, it was a tad ominous, but Naruto didn't seem to mind the odd structure, as if it was simply part of the wall itself. As if the boy was used to such things, he asked no questions and simply hopped atop the hard table, swinging his legs idly. The boy's humming gradually quieted as he glanced at the silver tools and bright lights that surrounded him, but he still seemed relaxed. The men that followed the duo went to work, hooking up the hollowed tendrils to the boy's back, others leaving the room only to return with a large assortment of oddities. The items were abnormal, to say the least, with vibrant colors and different shapes and sizes. They were so varied and peculiar that most would be surprised to realize what they truly were. Fruit. No, really, oddly colored fruit, meats, and vegetables, all of which looked almost alien in nature if only because they didn't belong together. These food items were the exotic, the rare, and the extremely exorbitant. On their own, they might have been unique in their varied effects or believed effects of making the consumer feel cold, energetic, deathly ill, or anything in between. However, when introduced to a boy named Naruto, they became something much more. The soldiers entered one at a time, presenting their gift to the young lad. The boy would pick a fare and take his time to eat and enjoy it. Nothing odd, nothing extraordinary, until the boy would begin to glow. Sometimes it was a dull gleam, possibly even mistaken for a sheen of sweat. Other times, it was a brilliant luminescence of lustrous color. But the result was always the same, a foreign, metallic, liquid-like substance, secreted from the boy's back, that would be pulled into the tubes and shaped. From there, the tar-like substance would be heated, molded, and expelled from the machine. Then came what was truly so spectacular about the young boy: metal. Never before seen metal, ingots of all different shapes, sizes, colors, and densities, each more varied and unique than the distinctive snowflake. These ingots that the boy had just expelled were a dark purple color, almost black really, with odd, violet swirl-like designs that shimmered ominously within the dusk. As time passed and the golden-haired youth finished his treat, new soldiers wearing multiple layers of protective gear entered the room and loaded the valuable products onto a cart. Some jotted down notes, others wielded boxes that made bright flashes and clicking noises. They all worked in tandem. What they did with bricks, the boy would likely never know, but Naruto was so focused on his meal that the rest of the world ceased to be. Thus, he never noticed nor cared about how his father closely studied the metals with a pleased look of appraisal. This process was repeated multiple times until the boy began to yawn and became visibly tired. As the boy began to nod off, A snap resonated around the room as half of the soldiers filtered out, and the other half stood even straighter if such a thing was possible. The older man would walk out of the room, the soft clicking of the cane being the only noise that followed his ever-silent glide, and the ever-dutiful soldiers would carefully lift the boy and carry him forward. They would return to his brightly lit room and lay the boy to rest, for after breakfast came one of his daily naps. He would shift and turn as the soldiers would filter out of his room once more, their subtle movements the only sign that they waited outside his door. And the boy would feel his father's presence as he went around the room, shifting small toys and storybooks into an orderly manner before letting out a small huff of resolution. He would then come next to him and pat the young boy on the shoulder, thanking him for something that the boy didn't understand but was happy to accept. The man's footsteps would fade, and the boy would be left to slumber within sheets of milk and honeyed dreams. Danzo had seen many things during his long life. His was one of war, strife, darkness, and understanding. Few ninjas would ever live as long as he had, many not even a third of that time, but his experience and realizations of the world made him worthy of leading. So, when he saw what the boy could do, he was also one of the few who was able to understand the ramifications. Near infinite, variable resources at their fingertips. The ability to make weapons that could equal if not surpass that of the hidden mist. Such a thing would easily cause war, but so too could it end them in an instant. Danzo saw a world where there was finally peace, where people would live in harmony under the great tree, and that vision was the only thing that stopped him from crushing the other villages as they truly deserved. Suna was weak, a mongrel that failed to feed itself even when the food was right before it. Iwa was a place of incompetent fools, starting wars they couldn't finish and then despising those who won. Kumo was a bunch of unrepentant thieves, whether trying to steal their Jinchuriki or their bloodlines. And Kiri was too busy slaughtering each other to see themselves being led around by their nose. No, Konoha was the only village that could and was worthy of carrying the weight of peace. Anyone with their right mind could see it, and if the child given to him was any indication, the gods agreed. What once was to be a weapon of war, a cannon to be aimed and fired, instead became the foundations for a new and greater tree to be born. The flame that kindled the roots of the great tree. Yet Danzo also knew one thing for sure: if someone were to find out about the boy's keen abilities, the next ninja war would be the least of their worries. In truth, moments like these made Danzo wish he could depend on the snake Sannin to help him understand Naruto's abilities. Sadly, Danzo knew he couldn't work with the traitorous Nin, lest he makes off with the hope for the future Konoha for some misguided journey for immortality or madness as he was prone to do. No, he would have to settle for less, but that didn't mean that there wasn't anyone of worth he could use. His abilities are growing quite quickly. I'm sure you must be feeling rather pleased. Kurogiri's answer was a simple glance before Danzo looked below them. As valuable as the man was, Danzo had no desire to speak with him unless necessary. His pastimes were wasteful. A single ninja was tied to a chair. By his headband, he seemed to be an Iwa Chunin. Indeed, Danzo had no shortage of them in the deep cells. Their home village seemed rather eager to sacrifice them in hopes of spying on their rival. Danzo watched idly as the man continued to struggle and shout expletives at the masked ninjas and silent doctors that moved around him. Slowly, most of the other doctors stood back as one of their own donned an encompassing gray suit layered with an assortment of seals. With a large pair of tongs, they picked up a black ingot engraved with violet waves and made their way to the screaming man. When they got within a foot of distance, they extended their arms and placed the metal onto the soon-to-be victim's body. At first, the man seemed nervous, but after nothing happened, he began laughing and mocking the covered figure. Yet the figure didn't respond, stepping back as other doctors and scientists gathered and took notes. And soon, the man felt why. It started out as a slight noise, but then a scream of horror and muted agony. For where the metal bar had been placed and spreading from it was a swath of mottled, black skin. My, necrosis, a nasty way to go. The head doctor observed before he was handed a notepad. Oh, and metallosis as well, quite the toxic material we have here. First, it rots the outside flesh, then it enters and poisons the bloodstream. At the very least, the victim would lose a limb. Most likely, it'll cripple half their body within a few minutes. For a moment, Danzo actually felt pity for the Iwa soldier. He could respect the man's commitment to his nation, even if he pledged himself to the wrong one. The Warhawk had seen necrosis firsthand during a mission into the land of snow. A bad case of frostbite that caused his teammate to lose 3 fingers and 2 toes. Shave off the dead skin and keep him alive. Maybe his teammates will finally talk. In all fairness, the man wouldn't live long, even if they stopped him from going under for a few days. Danzo wasn't one to waste resources. Nevertheless, Danzo handed the clipboard back to Kurigari. He knew that soon the cripple would go missing from his cell, just as he knew who would take him, but Danzo honestly couldn't find it in himself to care. Another blessing from their gift, this time it took the form of a ravenous plague sealed away within a metal vessel. Dangerous in the wrong hands, he'd have to be careful with how much of this Daquita, *1, metal they produced. Danzo tuned out the yells and screams as he walked further into the underground facility, quickly joined by his Ney operatives, and walked in silence as he allowed his mind to wander. How long had it been since he had changed his mind about the child? He was a logical person in his heart, or perhaps mind was better, so it only made sense that he did what was most efficient. For so long, Konoha only relied on prodigies and the rare legend in the making that seemed to spawn every generation. It was a sad truth that most ninjas below Jonin would end up as helpless fodder, but they could finally change that with this. Helpless. The man shifted and moved his covered arm before his face, glancing at the almost unnoticeable bulges that flinched every so often. If things were different, if he didn't have the child's miracles, he might have been worried about a raven-haired retribution. But now, well, he was given a blessing of his own, one which would help any foolish enough to challenge him to understand what was destined to be. Together under honeyed rays does the great tree lie, blessed from above, gallant from without. A small tune of patriotism from his academy days, one his son enjoyed humming. Before his mind wandered further, Danzo noticed his feet had stopped, and he looked forward and found a dead end with 5 small divots. He unwrapped part of his casted arm, revealing glinting, ruby fingertips to the world, and placed them into the small holes and twisted with a force that shouldn't belong to someone of his stature. A loud groaning welcomed him and revealed what looked to be a vault. Metals of all shapes, colors, weights, a variety of any kind of defining property hung upon the walls. Some were stored in freezers to keep them solid. Others were held in special containers to stop them from cracking the floor, but all had some form of use. Yet, one metal stood alone from the others, kept isolated to avoid contamination. It was the pinnacle of their blessings, one that stood beyond anything they had ever seen. Still, he couldn't bring himself to use it, not yet anyway. Oddly enough, it was one of the few minerals they were unsure of how to duplicate, yet it was also the first one they witnessed Naruto produce. What could he have eaten to create such a marvel? Until he knew, Danzo couldn't bear the thought of possibly ruining such a thing. But a time would come, oh it would come. It always did. Hiruzen was fed up, really and truly. He had enough of this foolishness. He shouldn't have been surprised. Kumo had always been rather untrustworthy, but this was a new low. Really? Demanding that they hand over a Hyuga after trying to kidnap the heiress would have been bad enough, but it was even worse when they succeeded in seizing their Jinchuriki. It was an oddly tactical move for the usually direct Raikage, but after trying and failing once, they wouldn't be true shinobi if they failed so spectacularly again. How Minato succeeded in saving Kushina as an academy still baffled him. He wasn't sure if it said a lot about the boy's talent or the incompetency of Kumo's shinobi. Nevertheless, Konoha's Kyuubi Jinchuriki was missing. A separate shinobi took the boy while her father slew the one who had taken the young heiress. The only problem was that when they apprehended the other ninja, Naruto was nowhere to be found, and the Kumo nin didn't have any memory of wherever he hid the boy or who he had passed Naruto off. As good as it was that Hizashi wouldn't have to be traded in some guise for peace, he couldn't help but wish things had ended differently. Perhaps if he had been more involved in the boy's life, maybe if he had just kept a closer eye on him. Yet the faces that stared back at him were too cold, their eyes lifeless and full of disappointment. The way he announced his condition, how the villagers treated him, how lonely and confused the boy must have felt. But when he looked at the boy, he didn't think of those things. He saw his dead wife's eyes, the gaunt form of his successor, and the bloodied figure of a girl he saw as his own granddaughter. It wasn't fair to the boy, oh, he would never claim it so, but it didn't stop the ache and hesitancy. The guilt and sorrow when the boy had asked him about his parents, and he had been forced to lie, The genuine confusion and hurt when Naruto asked why people hated him, and the Sarutobi couldn't answer. Lie after lie, all that remained were lies. He was a shinobi. They endured, lied, cheated, killed, and betrayed. But how could any Kage look a child of their nation in their face and perform such acts of negligent cruelty while keeping up a facade of strength? The wizened man slammed his hands upon the table before him as he let out a feral growl and pinched the bridge of his nose. Is this a bad time? Hirazen's brown eyes trailed upwards and stared with frustration that bordered frenzy. Jiraiya, I hope you've looked into what I asked of you. In fact, this better be good news, or I might take my anger on the first thing, no, the first person I see. His response was a slightly nervous look before a sigh and change in demeanor. Good, at least his student was serious. I've seen some of the NEI operatives investigating the area where the Kumo shinobi was captured. Danzo might be looking for the boy as well, given that he is the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. I wouldn't be surprised if the old Warhawk wanted to recapture the boy from Kumo to have for himself. Then again, I don't quite know him as well as you. First Kumo, now Danzo, was this another scheme to start another war? He told Danzo to disperse that hidden army of his, but he shouldn't be surprised that he simply hid it deeper. So now Hiruzen was left with a choice. Did he pursue Danzo? Drag him kicking and screaming out into the light? Or did he focus on Kumo, wretches though they were? Their army was the only one truly able to challenge theirs, even after the Kyuubi attack. Heated air blew from the old Kage's nose, and his eyes lowered to an enclosed letter. A letter sealed with a wax cloud symbol. The man raised his right arm into a fist before opening 3 fingers. A trio of masked figures revealed themselves in a kneeling position from the room's shadows. Gather Kakashi and Shikaku. It's time we remove the rot within the roots. 2 of the shinobi disappeared, and the other remained kneeling. Bring me my scroll and armor. It seemed Hiruzen just got serious. Naruto enjoyed being here. There was always plenty of food and lots of people to talk to. Well, there were lots of people, but most of them didn't speak. But they were nice. Whenever he asked for something, they were always eager to help. He also had a father now. He didn't know that you could find one at first, but his father found him, so maybe he still had a lot to learn. Sure, his father was strict, but that was okay. Otto-san cared about him, fussing over him when he scraped his knee, making sure he ate whenever he felt hungry and gifted him that weird hugging machine. Still, his favorite thing about being in this place wasn't his room nor the food, and it maybe even equaled how much he loved his father. It was Fridays. Every Thursday, new kids would come to join them. Father always picked out a few to play with him over the weekend. Sure, they never stayed for too long, but it was better than outside. No one ever wanted to play with him when he was outside, and his father had told him that many mean people were out there. Naruto believed him. The grown-ups out there never liked him, and the other kids always chased him away when he tried to join them. Still, as his father said, you can't focus on the past, the ink's already dry. Whatever that meant. Naruto bounced a large red ball a few times before passing it to the small youth across from him. She was a rather tall girl, with purple hair and warm brown eyes. The boy didn't focus much on her, but he might have noticed how her eyes kept flicking to the sides if he did. Possibly because of the masked figures that lay in wait. The blonde youth made a short noise of disapproval when the girl didn't pass back the ball. Flinching, the girl quickly turned back to the boy rigidly and rolled it back to him. That always confused Naruto. They were playing pass the ball, so he wasn't quite sure why she kept rolling it. Oh well, maybe she just didn't know how to play the game. As he picked up the ball again, he moved towards the taller girl with a spring in his step. Hey, wanna go get something to eat? I'm kind of hungry. Dad always says that I should eat whenever I feel hungry. What's your name anyway? The book I read told me it's good to remember your friends' names. The girl didn't respond, simply freezing up as he nudged her arm. The boy pouted as he began poking her. It's Amy. The girl whined pitiably. A hummy? Kind of odd, but it still sounds pretty. Let's go. I want to see if Otto-san brought me a treat today. Maybe you'll be able to try some too. The boy moved his arm into the young girl's and tugged her along, both closely followed by 4 rude shinobi. For some, these winding halls became synonymous with hell. For one particular boy, however, they were simply a bastion of dreams. Without chance, there was no change, and without change, one became stale and stagnant. In a world where conflicts often only lasted seconds, stagnation was synonymous with death. So, when Kurogari introduced the idea of introducing possibly toxic materials to the boy's diet, Danzo didn't immediately behead him. Oh sure, his finger flinched to gesture his route to secure the wretch's quick demise. But Danzo was nothing if not practical. And it was practicality that demanded they be cautious in how they did so. For instance, not all poisons were deadly, crippling, or even painful. Some of them were just mildly annoying, if not slightly debilitating. So, Danzo looked over his selection of poisons, carefully inspecting and separating them, before coming upon an especially weak one. A beggar's bloom. It grew mainly in a megacure and was known for the sweet juice the berries contained, but the poison also caused mild to painful stomach contractions. It was a favorite food during the Second and Third Ninja War for those with no other choices, hence the name, referring to the saying, beggars can't be choosers. This would be a good choice for Naruto. There had never been a known instance of anyone dying from the substance, and should the pain escalate, they could put him to sleep until it wore off. The man took the small vial of purple liquid and poured a third of a cup's worth into a glass of water. They'd have Naruto drink it before eating and watch the possible effects. As Danzo walked through the hallways, he found his mind wandering once more, a seemingly increasing occurrence since he had obtained the boy. Hiruzen was becoming more suspicious by the day. He wouldn't be the god of shinobi if he overlooked such operations in his own village, no matter how covert Danzo had been. The thing that troubled the old warhawk was how unpredictable the cage had become of late. His old rival was becoming more stressed, tensed, and, dare he say, vicious. The man who would at one point have sued for peace, even with how badly Kumo had blundered, was now ruthlessly denouncing the enemy village, subtly slandering the village's name with their clients. The village hidden in the clouds now had to worry about how their clients perceived their actions, having not prepared for a defamation campaign from the often peaceful Hokage. The fact that the Kumo nin captured alive was unregistered for visitation also didn't help the village's public image. Danzo was fortunate that his once team member didn't know he had a Yamanaka in his faction, or else the old monkey might have deduced what had truly happened. How long that would stay the case, Danzo didn't know. Before, Hiruzen was the type to battle with words, but recently, his aggressive actions had the root commander concerned that he might be more direct in the future. Specifically when dealing with him, Danzo would have to play his hands carefully lest he found them severed and bronzed. With that thought, the cane-wielding man found himself at the doors to the extraction chamber. Entering, he saw Kurogari standing back as doctors and scientists prepped the machines. 17 root nin were in the room, most of them watching the sadistic scientist. It was for the best. Ah, Danzo, what happened to being punctual? You sure took your time. And there went his good mood, the fool just had to open his mouth. Danzo simply ignored his remark and made his way to his son, walking through the parted path of men who waited for his cue. With a small smile and a slight opening of his left eye, Naruto would witness the rare event of his father exhibiting actual warmth. Or as close to warmth as the tundra-like man could exude. I thought you might like a slight change. I bought it from a megacure. Well, technically, he wasn't lying. You seemed rather interested in the area. I'll be sure to bring you more treats like this one if you enjoy it. His response was the boy looking at the glass in wonder, probably trying to guess what could be so special about it. Yet, his father hadn't led him wrong yet, so he nodded excitedly and made grabbing motions with his hands. Instead of admonishing the boy, the man simply let out a small huff and handed it over as Naruto began drinking the liquid. After he was done, Danzo watched closely as the blonde's body tensed up. Just a hiccup. Perhaps Naruto's ability only worked with food? They never focused on giving him liquids other than water, their main priority producing what they knew worked. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just as the elder was about to move back, the boy began humming as his body glowed a dim purple. Unlike the usual effect of a simple bright glow, the light shone upon the walls as if it was the sun shining through the water upon the seafloor. A beautiful spectacle, but what concerned the man was what came after. Instead of metal being expelled from his back, the energy slowly gathered and solidified until what was left wasn't metal at all. Shoten? Danzo had to admit, he found himself agreeing with Kurogari's assessment. It was a rather large crystal, about half the size of an anvil, that stuck itself to the boy's back as if it had somehow grown there. It shined lightly and, to his surprise, seemed to still be growing, as if still feeding off the boy's chakra. Hick, and just like that, the crystal popped off Naruto's back and found itself situated right behind the boy. The scientists looked confused for a second, unsure what the procedure was after months of repetition. That was until Kurogari snapped his finger and started barking off orders. They might as well follow the same procedure, at least until it proved ineffective. Hey, that's how they figured out how to deal with the metals. If someone didn't die in securing it, then it was good enough. Danzo raised an eyebrow as the boy hiccuped again before seeming pleased, swinging his legs happily and watching as the scientists scrambled around him. Again, Danzo approached, this time taking an appraising glance at the result of their most recent experiment. Apparently, his son wasn't limited to making metals as they first thought. Still, the possible applications would have to wait until he ensured that Naruto was healthy and safe. Kneeling, the Warhawk found himself looking into blue eyes that contained a myriad of colored embers that seemed to drift and flow every time his orbs blinked or glanced at different things. How are you feeling? Does anything hurt? Sue him. If anyone asked, he was simply protecting a profitable investment. I feel good. I've never had anything like that before. What was it? Blue raspberry? What? Was he supposed to tell the boy it was a poisonous berry? Besides, whoever heard of something as silly as a blue raspberry anyways? 1 asterisk. Make sure to bring me more next time. Now, Naruto, what did I teach you about proper etiquette? Please make sure to bring more next time? Close enough. Danzo helped the boy up and led him back to his room. They'd get some scientists to run more detailed health assurances before setting the boy to bed. Then they'd get to see precisely what the boy produced. This opened a new world of possibilities, but so too did it open up new possible dangers. Change was supposed to be a good thing, right? Thank you for all coming here today. I assure you that this is something vital. The steely gaze within their leader's eyes made them somewhat uncomfortable, but it did attest to the whispers circulating. Their village was going to take affirmative action. The big question was, against who? Kumo was the obvious choice, but was their Hokage really going to start the Fourth Ninja War? Konoha had never, at least publicly, started any of the wars of such magnitude. I know this has been a hard time for us. War appears to loom over the horizon as beasts, traitors, and thieves seem eager to attack us from every side. But we are Konoha, the first hidden village, the same village that has set the precedent time and time again. We cannot show weakness, we must be a bastion for those who believe in us. At this, many shinobi stood straighter, but Shikaku couldn't help but feel a foreboding dread. To him, this was the "many of you will likely not return" speech that leaders always gave out. He should know, he had written quite a few of them. Still, this time, the enemy we face isn't another beast, nor another village, but again one of our very own. Damn, that makes 3 traitors in what, 15 years? Orochimaru, then the still recent Itachi, who could be the one that establishes the now troublesome trio. My old teammate, Danzo. Honestly, Shikaku shouldn't have been surprised. Has established an army beneath our very feet within the old evacuation tunnels we left abandoned. He has ignored my ruling concerning these root operatives, and thus I have decided it is time to act. I revoke his elder position, I move to have his assets frozen until seen otherwise, and I declare him as an enemy of the state. He is to be captured and imprisoned until such a time where his punishment is decided. They all knew what that meant. Danzo's chakra was to be sealed, and he would be thrown into the tea and ice cells until they got all they needed to decide the elder's fate. If the man happened to fight against arrest, he would be executed on the spot. His name would then enter the books as one of the many traitors who were punished, all to ensure that those like Itachi and Orochimaru were never glorified. If Shikaku had any doubts that this would end in conflict, they were assuredly wiped away. If that wasn't bad enough, he'd have to get Yoshino something nice, so she didn't yell at him for going on such a dangerous mission. How troublesome. It's rather amazing if you think about it. Danzo let out a slight hum in response, focusing on what was happening below. Usually, Kurogari's voice would annoy him, but he was too pleased currently. To think that the possibilities were even more remarkable than they first believed, was there a limit to this bloodline? Danzo was almost scared of the answer. They watched as someone placed the crystal on their next victim's body. A kunoichi from Kumo, somewhat fitting perhaps, that had been spying around the borders and logging patrol information. Was it an indicator of war? Possibly, but it also might simply be routine. Kumo was always rather militaristic compared to the other villages, even Konoha. A sharp screeching sound filled the room, not loud enough to deafen but more than a slight annoyance. One would think the noise would be coming from the victim, but no, her mouth was trapped in a silent scream. They watched as dark purple lines traced across the woman's body, all of them leading to the crystal as it slowly grew in size, some of it even growing upon her body. After a few moments, Kurogari pressed the red button to stop the procedure, and their subordinates removed the original crystal from the body. Or was it a corpse? Oh, a small breath, still alive, it seemed. One of the scientists from below entered the viewing room, handed a board to his superior, and waited at the sides for further instruction. The crystal grew 1.86% from an exposure of the woman's 13.21 Cu, *1, of chakra over the course of 1 minute 13 seconds. Of her original chakra stores, only 237 milli-Cu, *2, remain. Well below the recommended 500 milli-Cu recommendation for a ninja to have at all times lest they risk organ failure. It seems her chakra system has been damaged as well. Put her down for a 3-day plan for 5 Cu. She doesn't have enough chakra for a food pill to be enough. Kurogari turned around and began to speak to Danzo when he realized the other scientist hadn't moved. What is it now? Didn't I tell you to get moving? Before responding, the man hesitated, probably due to knowing Kurogari's odd tendencies. Should we remove the crystals that have begun to graft over her skin, or would you like us to ignore them? We have no way of knowing if the chakra they absorb is proportional to their size. Because they seem to grow from eating chakra. The man left it unsaid, but Kurogari understood completely. As much as he would rather just yell at his subordinate, the man made a good point. Kurogari was sarcastic, possibly insane, and definitely malicious, but stupid he was not. If they left the crystals on the girl, and they consumed more as they grew from feeding, it wouldn't matter how much chakra they pumped into her. Still, the chance to observe those crystals over their cycle would be a scientific marvel. What to do? No, he knew what he wanted now. I'll tell you what, actually, what's your name? Akuzo, sir. All right, Akuzo. I want you to take the lead in this since you brought it to my attention. Remove all the crystals from her form. I want to study the effects on the prime test subject. The knowledge we gain will be more useful from a living patient. As for leaving the crystals on someone, go get that Iwid Chunin missing half his body. Might as well get some use out of him before he expires. With a nod, Akuzo went off to disperse instruction and begin the removal process of the crystals. A grunt bought his attention to see Danzo looking at him unamused. It seems the old warhawk didn't like to be ignored. What, you didn't get any of that? Must I repeat everything? The slight narrowing of the elder's eyes was enough to tell Kurogari that he was on thin ice. A miniature cringe appeared before he stamped it down. For a man with one eye, the old bastard had one heck of a glare. Still, the head scientist let out a sigh and explained. The crystals consume chakra and seem to grow based on how much they eat. The amount of chakra it devours might have some correlation to the size of the crystal itself, but with how little it grew, it could just be some machine error. The process of extracting the chakra seems to cause a large measure of pain, mostly because it pulls it out of the circulation system instead of the tenketsu, 3*. And we've all seen what the gentle fist can do when only attacking the tenketsu. Seeing how 98.21% of her chakra was fully consumed in the span of 1 minute and 13 seconds, the crystal is incredibly dangerous. Danzo nodded at that, absorbing the information and likely coming up with multiple scenarios on how he could use it in battle. The danger the crystal posed wasn't simply from how quickly it ate chakra but the sheer amount of pain the patient seemed to be in. He looked below to see the woman still spasming. If that was merely caused by placing the crystal on the skin, he doubted many people would be able to move if it was stabbed into them. The warhawk had to agree with Kurogari's assessment. The first subject would be better to keep alive, but seeing if the crystal would kill someone was something that also needed to be explored. Who better than a dead man walking to test it? I want the original crystal placed in my office. I'll personally put it in the vault. Until then, continue with the experiments. It's about time for Naruto's lunch. Isn't he still playing with that purple-haired girl? For now, it might be good to get the boy a new playmate soon. It wouldn't be good for him to get too close to such trash. Danzo exited without another word, and no more sounds were heard than the scribbling onto a clipboard. Come on, Ahami, I want to play another game. I'll even let you pick this time. One could not find a more contrasting pair. One was a tanned, blonde youth with a disposition so bright it surpassed even his own hair. The other was a pale, purple-haired girl who seemed to be on the brink of death. Amy couldn't help but shrink down and nearly cry, but she knew what might happen if she did. She had heard of it from some of the other recruits after a day of play. The Golden Child, the Miracle Maker, the Blessing of Great Tree, he went by many names, but he was special. His friends, on the other hand, were much less so. Anyone who brought down his happiness, that would dare introduce the very concept of sadness to the boy, found themselves missing for days, even weeks. When they came back, it was only a doll that was kept away from the boy. The child went through people as one would toys, and she knew that it would be her turn soon. How? Because of the phantoms that always followed them. Never speaking, ever present, always watching, and every day their gaze seemed to close in on her. Were they once his friends too? Did they get turned into dolls for him to use? Was the same going to happen to her? Ahami? A gentle prod caused a small shriek to leave her mouth in surprise, but she quickly stomped it down and froze, not daring to look into the watchers behind them. Ahami, are you alright? I can take you to the doctor if you want. Kurogari is kinda weird, but he can be really nice. He has purple hair like yours too. Oh, but I guess his is much darker. Is he your father, Kurogari? Did he already want to get rid of her? If there was one name more prevalent than Danzo-sama or Golden Boy, *4, it was Kurogari. The other orphans talked of him as if he was the devil itself. They were to avert their eyes when he passed, lest they wished to be taken next. Suddenly, everything became silent, the room began to spin, and the voices seemed to mesh. What was happening? Was it one of those genjutsu? Were they already getting rid of her? She felt like she was going to throw up. She felt like she was going to die. And yet, even she was present for what came next. It was loud, incredibly so, a constant reverberating. She felt someone pass her, golden hair, golden boy. Then she felt a harsh kick as someone sped past her. Their masked visages not even sparing her a glance. What was going on? Where was everyone going? She was alone again. A horrid scream cut through the air and following it, a cacophony of howls and screeches as if the doors to hell had opened. Nato was having a decent day. Not a bad day to be a mindless drone, not a bad day at all. Sure, it was raining, but he was conditioned not to care. A bit muggy from the heat too, but he didn't care. Kinda creepy and dark out here, but crick, snap, a sound, now he cared. Nato signaled that he would investigate, getting a grunt of confirmation. He moved towards the bushes, slowly scanning for any form of disturbance, but he found nothing. Yet, Nato wasn't convinced. He was a ninja, and the first rule of being a ninja, paranoia, could only be a good thing. The agent was proven right as he was forced to jump back, a knuckled knife stabbing into where his jugular would have been. He backed up further, anticipating his reinforcements, but instead, his instincts flared again. Not quick enough. It was a sharp pain that ended in an instant, only his chakra-enhanced perception ensuring he even felt that, a stab to the temple, a nice, clean kill. Come on already. Let go, you bastard. Maybe not. Anko, just leave the knife. We've got more pressing matters. Go to hell, Kakashi. These things are expensive. I'll be damned if I waste any money on a kunai I could have recovered. Hey, Asuma, you missed. Must be getting rusty, should be training more instead of hitting on kuranai. Soon's only response was a slew of grumbles and a slight chuckle from the woman in question. Hiruzen couldn't help but watch his subordinates in disbelief. Perhaps it was because he hadn't been on a mission for a while, being Hokage and all, but he didn't remember so much mid-murder banter. Maybe they just all snapped. Area cleared, sir. Ah, a normal person. Perhaps he wasn't going crazy. Thank you, Tens. Hiruzen met a face of shadows that looked like it belonged in purgatory, perhaps even that creepy Uzumaki temple. The worst part was that he wasn't even sure if the brown-haired man was trying. Let's just go. I want to get this over with. Hiruzen was done with this. He just wanted to apprehend Danzo and go home. They all moved throughout the ominous, dark tunnel. Oddly enough, the path was arid, even with the rain. The Hokage was surrounded on all sides by his crazy, yet thankfully reliable, ninjas, so he couldn't help but let his mind drift slightly. His thoughts flowed as his instincts took over. What would he say when he met Danzo? The Hokage couldn't help but feel his anger grow before dimming as it became sorrow and frustration. How could things go so wrong? They were never technically teammates, but with how often Danzo had been paired with Team Tobirama during the First War, they might as well have been. He had always thought of the man as a brother, yet it seems he was again betrayed by those close to him. One could only go through so many relationships before wondering if they were at fault. First, Tsunade left the village, then Orochimaru went rogue, and now Danzo became a traitor himself. Was he doomed to surround himself with those who were destined to die or doomed to betray him? He wouldn't allow himself to get drawn into such thoughts. As much as he and Danzo disagreed, even the Sandaime acknowledged that emotion had a time and place. Now was neither of those. Danzo would get no mercy from him, for he had seen what had happened when he hesitated with one of the men he saw as his own son. No, the stakes were too high now. This had to be quick. If it was drawn out, a civil war was sure to occur, and if that happened, the other villages would smell the blood and collapse on their home. Should that come to pass, Lord help them all. The ensuing power vacuum would only incite a great ninja war where no neutral stances would be allowed. The efforts of the Shodai would be erased as chaos consumed the continent. He would rather use the Shikifu Jin before he allowed that to happen. By the time his thoughts halted, he had found his form already moving as a large gust knocked the barrage of shuriken out of the way. It had been a while since he used futon, daitopa. It felt rather odd now. No matter, it was time for them to finish this. Hiruzen summoned a standard bow staff and knocked 3 swords off their path, leaving the Nei agents staggered and unable to recover in time. By the time their instincts flared, it was much too late. Several cracks filled the air as their necks flailed from the blow. Hiruzen whispered a small prayer as he moved forward, ducking under several of Anko's snakes and kicking another agent into a Gatsuga that nigh tore them to bits. This was a bloody affair, one that never needed to happen if not for his rival's stubbornness. All of this for what? Because he didn't get the Hokage's seat? Or was it simply because Hiruzen refused to enter such petty wars? Why couldn't he understand that this path would only lead their village to self-destruction? He was prepared to do what had to be done. Yet, he still hoped his teammate would do the right thing, that he'd listen to him for once in his life. Hey, Dad, look alive. Hiruzen glanced to see his son leap forward and start making hand signs, and so the Hokage joined him and started making some of his own. Kaiten. Heizekisho. Futon. Daitopa. The plume of ash ignited in a horrid, orange blaze, and just as it seemed to dwindle, it multiplied in size and became an azure wave of destruction. The root shinobi stood no chance. Whatever remained of their adversaries became one with the fire, and those that still lived were being detained and had their chakras sealed. You know, I thought you would use the same attack as me. Oh, you see, this is why I'm the professor. I don't need to use such flashy moves to make an entrance. Asuma's response was an eye roll until Hiruzen smacked his head with a staff. His son looked at him with annoyance, only to see his father already walking away with a chuckle. Whatever joy was left of the mood soon dried up as the tunnels opened to a large, brightly lit room. His shinobi flanked his sides as they spread out and looked around, noting anything of worth. Yet, the only things they found were a metal chair, some stains on the floor, and what looked to be some purple crystals. Hiruzen peered at them before sensing a presence at his side. What do you think? The crystals or Danzo's absence? The crystals aren't like anything I've ever seen. I thought of taking one back, if maybe just to give it to our science division, but there's this feeling that makes me hesitant to touch it. Hiruzen nodded at that. He didn't notice at first, but when Jiraiya pointed it out, he could feel it slightly as well. It could be the fact that his student was a sage, and that increased his awareness of such a subject, but that only made him warier of what the crystals could be. And Danzo? Well, you know him better than I do, but I'm sure we both agree that Danzo's aware of our presence. Hell, he's probably known since we first stepped foot in the tunnel. As for where he is, probably setting some trap as he always is. Not quite. The two looked up to see the man in question. He walked into the room with a slow gait, back straight and head held high as if he didn't just nearly start a civil war. The cane he usually used did nothing to impede his stride, and he stopped as he stood a few meters away from them. Soon, the man was joined by multiple root anbu and a small number of men shrouded by bulky protective gear. They lined up neatly as a few more of the smaller number entered the room, dragging a metal table on wheels. "Hiruzen, I see you've seen fit to join us. I should be saying that to you." The Hokage could only growl as he looked into his once friend's soul eye. There was no loathing in the cripple's gaze, nor was there any indication of movement from his body language. Just what was he up to? "Danzo, stop this madness, turn yourself in and come to trial. There's so much I have learned, Hiruzen, so much to show. I have seen things that have opened my eyes beyond anything you could possibly imagine. We need not conflict. Simply come and see. There is no other option, old friend. Submit to arrest or die, but it ends here." "How could I die, Hiruzen? How could I possibly die before I showed you this miracle? Do you not see the blessings that exist before you? Perhaps the darkness that once consumed me made it easier to see the grace surrounding our village. We've been chosen, Hiruzen. Enough, I offered you a chance to surrender, but I can offer you no more. No tricks will save you now." The raven-haired man looked at him with sorrow as if the people before him were lost and pitiable. "No tricks. Allow me to show you. Forefathers, one and all." The warhawk reached for his bandages. "Engage now. Don't let him trigger any seals." Yet the man didn't attempt any hand signs. His feet stayed still. The only thing he did was unwrap his left arm. Whatever Hiruzen expected, it wasn't this. As before his very eyes was an arm of scarlet steel, pulsating as if the thing itself was a living being. The metal rippled as it became warped and barbed. The slight bulges on the arm quickly flicked open, revealing crazed, twitching, red eyes on a black canvas. Some form of Sharingan? What was? Bear witness. And suddenly, everything went to shit. "Danzo, what have you done to yourself?" The arm had settled, the barbs solidifying as molten metal stopped dripping from the appendage. The eyes that once twitched rapidly calmed and focused on them, half-lidded as if they weren't even a threat. But what astounded the Hokage, even more, was a familiar amethyst crystal that was sculpted into an orb and implanted within his adversary's once empty eye socket. "I have accepted the blessing. You might see me as cursed or craven, but I have become more than I ever was. Tell me, Hiruzen, do you know what it is like to be broken? As a shinobi, when my body was carved and shattered, I held pride in that it was done in the name of our nation. Yet pride only lasts for so long, and over time I began to hate those around me. The villagers that lived their pathetic lives, never realizing or appreciating the pain and agony we shinobi go through to keep it so. My Konoha would be one where shinobi ruled, where the world's truth would be laid bare before the sheep. But the miracle has shown me a new truth. It has opened gateways that were supposed to be forever closed. Whispers of a newer, larger, yet weaker world and the false gods that would lay claim to it. I do not see them, but I know their name. Olympian. If it wasn't for how calmly his old friend had said it, Hiruzen would have been sure his rival had become senile. Gods? Miracles? When had his friend been consumed by such fervor? No, Danzo was too far gone. Whatever had happened to his friend had spread too far. There was only one end to this. Will you join me, Hiruzen? In this quest handed from the heavens? I'm sorry, old friend. For a second, silence ruled, but it could not last forever. The two teammates stared each other down. One had eyes fueled by acceptance and resolution, the other calm and understanding. I see. I will not kill you. All of you have been chosen by the grace of our miracle. For I am not the one destined to dethrone the false gods, I am but a shepherd. With that, the once crippled man grasped at the table behind him with his scarlet arm and flung a shadowed figure at them. Most of the Jonin scattered in time, but two shinobi were unlucky enough to be grazed by it. The gasps and chokes drew the survivors' attention as they saw a corpse that was missing half its limbs atop them. Yet they soon saw the source of their comrades' agony as purple gems began to grow upon their form. The minerals continued to creep up their bodies, growing quicker by the second before suddenly dulling in color and stopping. They turned back to the warhawk and saw his arm clenched and the gem in his eye shining brightly. I did say I wouldn't kill any of you, but punishment is often needed for the stubborn lamb. Some of the shinobi, those particularly close to the felled Jonin, rushed their enemy, trading a flurry of blows. They worked in tandem, attacking where their fellows left openings and dodging to make opportunities for their allies. Yet it was all for naught. One Jonin found the front of his forest green jacket shredded as the oddly warm metal arm grazed his flesh. Just as he was about to jump backward, he discovered his body failed to respond, trapped in a relatively gentle grasp. Do you know what it's like to have your heart stop? It sounds rather quick, but you will find it agonizing. Worry not, my miracle is merciful. But still, perhaps a demonstration is in order. The Jonin didn't have a chance to reply before his chest clenched, and his once rigid body began to twitch and thrum, forcing the man to collapse to his knees as agony gripped him. He looked up with anger but was launched backward as a foot slammed into him. Hiruzen, stop with this foolishness. I simply want to show you something. The Sarutobi clan head couldn't believe his eyes. Danzo had never been this strong. Oh, sure. His rival had been many steps above the average Jonin. But to take on so many without looking any worse for wear? The Sandaime then realized just how dangerous Danzo had become beneath his nose. Had his rival been preparing for a civil war this whole time? No, I haven't. I wasn't illuminated to the truth until rather recently. The chosen son spoke to me and told me the truth, and now I follow the path of the miracle, just as you can. Hiruzen couldn't help but scoff. He must have been rather rusty if he allowed Danzo to read him so easily. Nevertheless, it seemed time for him to enter the fray. The Sandaime summoned his personal staff from his scroll and patted off his armor. Hold off the fodder Jonin. The so-called fodder Jonin seemed to know precisely who they were, but still, they were rather shocked at the Warhawk's audacity. They didn't have much time to complain as the root agents closed in, leaving behind the bulkily clothed figures to retreat into shadow. The room was soon full of clashes of metal as the two elders stared each other down. The renowned Jonin that remained moved to engage, but they too were stopped as two cloaked figures dropped from above. Both were wrapped in thick cloaks, not nearly as bulky as those who retreated, but they were much thicker than the average shinobi gear. However, the thing that truly threw them off was the size of their new adversaries, as neither reached above the neckline of the Jonin, likely meaning one thing. One asterisk, you would dare, Danzo? Why so surprised? I gave the trash a new purpose. Even they are welcomed with open arms by our miracle. Sarutobi could only growl at the response. Sadly, he knew he shouldn't have been surprised. Yet, he couldn't help but wonder if this miracle was indeed at fault, when Danzo had done similarly before he stopped him the first time. Did this miracle even exist? Kakashi, Shikaku, make teams and engage the two root agents. Jiraiya, you're with me. Let's end this quickly. The Jonin nodded as they separated into two groups and assailed the cloaked figures, hoping to finish this fight as soon as possible and assist their leader. Yet they would quickly find out that their chosen enemies would be much more challenging to face than they first believed. Kakashi had done this before, but he couldn't say he was quite fond of it. Facing children had always been a weak point of his, of any decent person. So, when he stood in front of their short adversary, he couldn't say he didn't hesitate. A glance at his team showed him that they shared his thoughts. Looking at Kurenai, he could tell she took it especially hard. Green Jonin had a harder time than the rest of them. It didn't help that the little Hyuga she tutored wasn't much younger than them. For this reason, Kakashi was rather glad Guy was out on a mission for this one. Someone as sunny as him didn't need to stain his hands like this. It'd be best if he did it himself. A little more blood wouldn't affect anything. I don't suppose I could get you to surrender, could I? Glory to the merciful miracle. I'll take that as a no. So here they were, a trio of Jonin against what Kakashi hoped was a dwarf and not a child. Hey, dwarfs were adults, so they're fair game. A public porn connoisseur, a man who always smelled like a smokestack, and a woman who would probably be nagging both of the former if they weren't in this situation. Oh, joy. I guess I'll go first. The silver-haired man was upon the short figure within a blink, kunai stabbing forward towards their temple. He'd make it a clean kill, he had done it many times. Yet just as his weapon nearly made its way home, he felt a harsh tug that nearly tore his arm out of place and forced his head backward. The kunai went flying from his grip, and if the feminine growl was any indication, it nearly hit one of his comrades. Watch where you're throwing those, you damn Cyclops. Oops. He turned back to his enemy to see that they had moved back and watched him warily. From the places he felt the force applied to his body, it seemed that their enemy could use magnet release to some degree. No, they didn't make any gestures, and as mysterious as the child was, he doubted they could have had enough mastery to create such force without any hand signs. So that left seals? Where though? Perhaps inside the code. Since when did Danzo get a seal master? The Jonin muttered. You are no match for our miracle. Surrender, and witness a new age. Geez, you sure love to hear yourself talk, don't you? He received no response, so he signaled Asuma to help him and Kurenai to provide support. Asuma, watch out for magnetism. Those trench knives of yours aren't going to cut it. Yeah, like that root nin from earlier. To hell with you, Sume? Fine, whatever, I have some other jutsu I can use, but that jacket seems padded. It probably has metal inside. We're not going to do much damage unless we have something to pierce it or something destructive enough to tear it in one go. Right, I need you to get them into position. Kurenai, stall him, I'll do the rest. With a nod from his teammates, they had a plan of attack. Now, they just had to hope that their enemy didn't have any more tricks up their oddly long sleeves. Kakashi didn't hold his breath. As Kakashi's group prepared to engage once more, Shikaku had come to many of the conclusions that the Scarecrow had and a few more. Sparks nearly spilled into his eyes as the oddly colored blade their opponent had bit slowly into his own knife. Thankfully, their enemy was forced to dodge as Sume engaged them. The figure leapt back but was slammed into by a wooden beam provided by Tenzo. Yet, when their cloaked enemy got back up, they looked only slightly worse for wear. Submit you are. We are no match for your miracle. We get it already. Got any other voice lines? No. Danzo must have had a small budget for this one. Shikaku couldn't help but shake his head at Sume. Out of all the madness the Jonin showed, she held the most of it. How troublesome, both his feral teammate and their obtuse enemy. The strategist sighed and did what he did best, but honestly, he was coming up with a blank. Oh sure, he could stop them for a bit, but whatever that weapon was didn't seem to need their adversary to move for it to be a danger. As if summoned by his complaints, the once solid yellow sword evaporated before reforming into smaller blades that stormed in their direction. As it was, their enemy simply stood still and watched. The question was, why? Obviously, they wanted to end this as quickly as possible. That's how root ninjas were programmed, so either this one was programmed differently, they saw no reason to move, or most likely, they couldn't move. The question again became, why and how could Shikaku use it to their advantage? Tenzo, while they have their blades out, I need you to knock them around. I have to test something. The Mokuton user didn't hesitate and sent multiple wooden beams at their enemy. Before the small devil could even attempt any action, they felt themselves restricted by Shikaku's shadow. A few of the golden blades were batted aside by the wood release technique, and right before impact with the enemy, the tactician released his jutsu. Their enemy took a few hits, but again, their blades redirected towards Tenzo, forcing him to cancel his barrage. Damn, so moving them didn't do it, neither did breaking their concentration if the continued barrage was any indicator. Except, there was one thing Shikaku noticed. Surprisingly enough, it was before Tenzo's attack connected, when his shadow still tied them together. A slight flinch every time one of their blades was batted away, but that didn't make sense. What kind of seal would allow something like that? To place the pain receptors within something that didn't even have a nervous system? Wait, did they somehow transfer their brain signals to the blades? That took, like an extension of the arm, to a whole new level. Shikaku was beginning to believe that this miracle thing might be real because he couldn't see any other way this was possible. Your mistake was believing that my armor alone had an ability. Well, shit, long sleeves mean lots of tricks, it seemed. Should have known. His Reikiri slowly fizzled out as a long, sky-blue blade blocked his attack. He'd admit this one was a first, and he didn't think he liked how it felt. He liked it even less when ice started creeping up his fingertips. A quick maneuver got him out of immediate danger, but he still couldn't feel his right hand. This just got a whole lot more difficult. The masked figure moved their weapon from side to side before flicking it down quickly. From that action, a light blue bolt of electricity struck the ground. Oh, but that wasn't all because that would be too easy. No, where the lightning struck, the earth also froze solid. Kakashi had to admit, he was at a loss for how that worked, but he also didn't expect the short zealot to answer. Or rather, he already knew how they would respond. Our miracle has blessed us. Join our. Oh, to hell with your miracle. I'm going after them next. For the first time, the masked assailant's tone seemed to change and became steeped in anger. You dare? You are unworthy of the miracle's blessing, but it is merciful and declares your survival. Well, didn't that just make him feel all warm and fuzzy inside? Whatever the scarecrow was going to plan next was interrupted by an explosion that shook the very foundations of the underground facility. Kakashi glanced towards their Hokage to see an arc of black flames blast towards the venerable leader. Say what you would, but Kakashi was glad he wasn't fighting that. He quickly glanced back towards their small enemy and realized that they were still distracted, so with the speed and silence that came from being an Anbu captain, he had a Tonto at their neck before they could even fully turn. He braced himself for the magnetic pulse that was sure to follow, only to find himself uninhibited by the foggy-eyed youth. Genjutsu, now they were getting somewhere. Sadly, he had underestimated the armor within the cloak's collar. The strike wasn't lethal, but they had an opening now. The Jonin quickly backstepped as a bolt of cerulean lightning nearly made neat work of him. Before the child could follow up, it found itself blown to the side by a sea of fire. Its cloak scorched, but its form unharmed. The zealot looked up only to find the one-eyed brute racing to finish them off once more. Yet it had a surprise in store for the man, as it quickly raised its sword as if to toss it. Kakashi was momentarily confused. It was a one-sided sword, not some spear or javelin. Suddenly the sword flashed and boomed. What became of it looked something much more like a spear of lightning. You couldn't make this shit up. This is bullsh. A sharp whistling sound entered as a light blue flash erupted before his eyes. He felt his body seize up, but it seemed as if their enemy didn't fare too well either, if their frozen arm was any indication. Looks like Asuma's wind-enhanced trench knives finally came in handy. Kakashi felt his body being propped up slightly to see Asuma helping him up. Why do I feel like you just dissed my trench knives? No reason? Neither of them was convinced by that statement. Either way, they had to get up. They still had to finish off the kid. Yet once again, Kakashi was interrupted. This time it wasn't by some spear of lightning, nor any form of attack, but by a feminine, choked gasp. Both Jonin quickly rose to see Kurenai. Oh shit. Situated before them was a scene they never wanted to see. An unmasked person flailing on the weeping woman's lap, struggling, holding, pawing at the ravenette's arm as they choked on a scarlet fluid that spilled from their lips. No, her lips. Just a young girl, yet they all knew that this is where her story ended. They heard the woman whisper to the child as the figure slowly stilled and released a whine that dipped into silence. Kurenai still held the girl, watching her closely as she breathed her last breaths and her form went lax. Hiruzen and Jiraiya watched as their adversary rose his scarlet hand once more. It was a slow, methodical movement, one done with patience and purpose. The Warhawk clenched his hand again and repeated the phrase from before. Bear witness. And his arm erupted in a fire black as night, the red eyes within the limbs staring ominously like scarlet stars upon a shifting black canvas. He lowered his arm and sighed, a slight noise of contentedness. Are you ready, monkey? This has been quite a time in the making. Perhaps I should enjoy this some before you accept our grace. I'm here too, you old bastard. Jiraiya received no reply but prepared himself for battle anyways. Whatever Danzo had become wasn't natural. That crimson arm, Jiraiya had never sensed anything quite like it. He would have remembered such a dreadful thing. One would think the malformed appendage would give off a feeling of revulsion, perhaps even pure evil, but it didn't. Instead, it gave off the feeling of being patiently watched, sometimes seeming more active and aggressive, other times even seeming completely unresponsive. What exactly was that limb, and where exactly did Danzo find it? Asterisk 2. Honestly, the sage was open to almost anything right now. He'd even believe it was some relic from before the Warring Era, some kind of divine being, though? He wasn't quite so sure. Then again, prophecies weren't so sensical either. Danzo cracked his neck and then moved his lips as if to whistle. The result? A blade of black fire sent careening between the two men who dodged. A vacuum technique plus a fire that could somehow survive within it? Now, this was just getting ridiculous. It only got worse when the bastard spat out several black bullets instead, one of them singeing his shirt and forcing him to toss it. The ebony inferno spread all around them, too numerous for the flame sealing method to be truly useful. They'd have to be careful, but hopefully, so would Danzo. There would be no summoning in here, it wasn't large enough for any of the giant toads. He could summon Ma and Pa, but he hoped it didn't come to that. They weren't too happy with how little he visited his godson. Poof. It seemed his teacher wasn't as restricted as he was. Lord Enma stood in all his glory, staring at the man whose only response was an unimpressed gaze. Enma, we'll need your help with this. We have another traitor in our midst, and I don't plan to let this one get away. It seems you've found your resolve, Hiruzen. Very well, you can count on my support. Let us show this one that treachery will not be tolerated within Konoha. At this, the warhawk rose an eyebrow and plopped down on a slab of stone. A stone that was covered in black flames. Black flames that parted when he decided to perch himself upon them. Jiraiya was just over it now. Part of him wanted to exclaim, but it wouldn't even change anything, so he just muttered a few unpleasant words and crossed his arms. This is bullsh. Even though Kakashi wasn't able to finish, Jiraiya wholeheartedly agreed. Tell me, how am I a traitor? I am bringing a sermon that shall elevate our country to a plane with the very stars. You fail to understand, I don't blame you for that, but it's how you don't even try. All these things around you, can you actually explain it? Will you deny our miracles blessings that surround you on all sides? Upon a throne of black flames, here I sit. Tell me, who else could do such a thing without being blessed by a higher being? The devil most likely. Both Hiruzen and Enma couldn't help but take a glance at him. Danzo just looked at him with a tilted head. What? He wasn't wrong. A sigh rang through the air. It seems you will not listen until I show you personally. So be it. I foolishly thought the two of you might come to your senses with a small demonstration, but I see I had too much hope in you. I must not forget that this is a world of the godless and heretics who follow false idols. The man stood once more before crouching slightly. He began to make hand signs, ones that looked familiar, but Jiraiya couldn't quite make them out. Allow me to show you the gift passed to me from the heavens, Enten. Gokakyu no Jutsu. 3 asterisk. Oh, wasn't that attack supposed to be orange? Jiraiya jumped away from the attack, but the explosion blasted him back even further and shook the room. Debris fell from the ceiling, and suddenly, the area didn't seem safe nor hidden anymore. For above them, the full moon hung, shining down upon their battle. Sheesh, talk about overdramatic. Well, if we're going to have an epic battle, I might as well go all out. The loud noise caused Naruto's ears to ring. He felt his body tremble, and his nerves begin to fray. What once was a happy lad became a slightly twitching youth. Like a chill breeze across his skin, he could feel it. Something was gone now, but he couldn't figure out what. Did he forget something? He didn't think so. He never brought much out of his room, and his friends always brought anything he accidentally left behind. A slight groan left his lips as he felt his body shudder and begin to burn hot. The chill was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable warmth that started at the base of his spine and then swarmed across his back. Soon, a warbled mess began hissing in his ears, odd noises, odd sounds, but he couldn't make them out. All he could understand was the intent, a warning. Father is in trouble. A small pattering grew into harsh claps across the ground, bare feet meeting fallen stone and dust that drifted from the shaking ceiling. An assortment of quiet steps followed Naruto on his journey, whether to watch him or because they sensed the same was lost to the boy. Yet as time passed and his father felt ever far away, the boy's desperation grew. The burning came back, this time threefold. However, it no longer hurt the boy, simply pushing him faster, urging him to go as quickly as he desired, and then even more so. The footsteps that trailed his own stopped suddenly, once there, the next instant gone. But the blonde didn't notice as he continued to climb over debris and closed in on the loud noises. The boy never noticed the slight crimson glow had begun to light the darkness around him. Nor the wave-like auroras that drifted across the walls and dripped from the ceiling. All of it from a slight crimson twinkle that began to grow upon his back. Danzo did all he could to hold off his two foes, but as he was told, he wouldn't last too much longer. Hiruzen was bad enough with his damn unbreakable staff, but the Warhawk would nearly argue that the Toad Sage was worse. What with all the screeching, swamp-making, and super strength? He thought only his metal arm could give him such raw power, but the man's enhanced strikes nearly matched his own. His durability, however, surpassed the Root Commander in spades. The dark-haired elder felt his chest begin to pinch and realized that his body still could not use the miracle to its full extent. Yet, Danzo did not stress, he did not curse this bout of weakness. For it was prophesied to him. The shepherd to lead them, that's what his purpose was, and his role was nearing the next phase. Tiring yet, old friend? Quite, but I supposed a 2-on-1 would do that. Oh hush, we're shinobi. Since when do we play fair? Still, he supposed it could be much worse. He had that suicidal technique, and he probably would have used it if it wasn't for his newfound enlightenment. Yes, Danzo decided, he rather liked living. He would like it, even more, when the new world came to be. The man sat down on a stone boulder that fell from the ceiling, watching as the two Konoha nin appeared before him and approached. Are you ready to die, Danzo? When did you take the surrender option off of the table? Would you surrender willingly now? Perhaps. Danzo watched as his old friend's face furrowed slightly in suspicion and annoyance. Hiruzen truly did have a resting bitch face. So be it, turn around, and get on your knees. By the look on Jiraiya's face, it seemed he really wanted to say something, but Danzo would take the small mercy when the man decided not to. The Warhawk felt Hiruzen place a tag on his back right before his body seized and fell over. A paralyzing tag, really? It seems Hiruzen carried some vindictiveness after all. No matter, he'd be arrested, and then he could convince the council of the merits of their miracle. All right, everyone spread out. We need to, father? His eye raised up to look upon a familiar, cherubic visage. Golden hair, shimmering eyes, and a wiry form. Oh, this wasn't what he had planned. For the first time since seeing the miracle, Danzo felt fear. Naruto glanced at his father's bruised form in confusion, not entirely understanding what was happening. Yet, he peered around and saw the slumped forms of his friends, their blank masks broken and their familiar gray and black ensemble shredded to pieces. What was going on? Who were these people? Why were they here? The boy's eyes drifted further to see a head of dusky blue hair that he remembered brushing into twin ponytails once upon a time. Yet the hair was stained with a brownish-red color, and the once silk-like texture seemed crusted and stiff. Nico? Where had she been? Why was she so still? And why was that woman holding her looking at him so intensely? Shimmering eyes snapped in that direction, only to behold a cracked mask that once hid sandy hair and citrine eyes. The gasping boy looked familiar, but beyond a small feeling of warmth, nothing else appeared. Who was this person, and why did they seem so concerned for him when they were the one hurt? Miracle, you must leave. I will hold them off. The heretics would only thrust horrors upon you. Please, allow me to do this. Allow me to do this last thing for you while I still feel your blessing. Miracle? Blessing? Hurt? Father? The boy's mind blurred as he tried to make sense of everything, but it was so difficult. It was so difficult when his back burned so badly. He felt his arm spasm slightly and looked at it languidly. A red glimmer, it was rather pretty, but where did it come from? Naruto. Is that you? The boy looked up to see a man in a floppy hat. It almost bounced when he moved. The sight made him want to smile. Yet again, the burning interrupted him. Then it consumed him. And then all he heard were screams, bellows, howls, and a voice beneath them all that beckoned him deeper into the depths. My beloved brother, you would dare deny me? Your God? Then suffer the consequences. They have come, and they have turned against my desires. You shall not join them. Follow my will. You desired my attention. Now flee from my gaze lest you be destroyed. We love you, but we cannot allow you to continue. I'm sorry. The world is so cold without you. Would it be so bad to burn it away? A world without false beings, a world ruled by a heartless machine. You have become my vessel. Worry not, we shall remake this place. Together. I'm sorry, my sweet child. We'll see each other soon, Naruto. For the boy, all of it was senseless. Many of the voices lacked familiarity, and the rest failed to bring any memories to the front of his mind. Was it just a dream? How did he get here anyway? Here was rather relative, as the boy wasn't quite sure just where he was. It almost looked like home with the dull colors and stone walls on all sides. However, Naruto had memorized every route within his haven. After all, it was his favorite pastime, wandering the hallways and seeing where his friends would be hiding. The only places he hadn't seen were the doors his masked watchers always seemed to steer him away from. The golden-haired youth simply believed they were hiding something embarrassing. Why else wouldn't they show him? No, there was one reason why Naruto was relatively sure he wasn't home. It wasn't the odd, dull red walls that surrounded him nor the fact that the stone that made up the place seemed a tad too sleek. It was how apprehensive it made him. It felt like he was constantly being watched, as if the walls and even the very floor surrounding him were alive and waiting. For what? The boy wasn't quite sure. He didn't have much on him, not even his books. Still, the boy shrugged and began to rise, only to stagger. Feels weird. Perhaps the boy was still sleepy, he just woke up after all, or maybe he was dreaming, but he felt rather heavy. Naruto tried again, raising his right side, success, and then his left, not so much. The boy peered at his left side with a scrunched visage, only to blink in surprise. Whoa, where did you come from? From the bottom of his left elbow wasn't the usual tan skin he was used to, but a sleek, scarlet, metallic contour instead. The boy looked at it with wonder and delight, as if it was some new toy to enjoy and play with. The boy poked and prodded his left appendage with his right hand and found, to his surprise, that he could still feel with it. It felt like a glancing touch, almost as if his arm was surrounded by rubber and something was attempting to graze it. The boy then opened and closed his fist, and it responded aptly. Was it some form of special glove? Perhaps father got it for him? He pulled on his index finger, but there was no resistance nor sign of it coming off. Weird. Well, Naruto had other things to worry about. First, the youth had to get something to eat. He was feeling hungry, and his father said he should always eat if he was hungry. All he had to do was find one of his friends or father if he could find him, and they'd give him lots of treats. With his mind made up, the boy went off deeper into the cavern, looking around at the abnormal walls. Part of him couldn't help but wonder what they were made out of. He had never seen walls move like that before. A growl from his stomach stopped his thoughts as he patted it in surprise. Man, Naruto hadn't felt this hungry in a long time. Oh well, only another reason to keep moving. I'm telling you, there's no way it's going to work. She's the goddess of the hunt. How the hell would she fall into a trap like that? Voices? Voices. Those meant friends and friends meant food, but he didn't remember his friends talking so much. Maybe they had finally decided to stop being so quiet. They didn't have to be so mysterious for him to like them. He'd like them anyways. The boy crept around the corner, eager to surprise the taller men and women, but what he saw was somewhat baffling. Wow, he had never seen friends with fur before. Or scales, for that matter. The boy watched idly as the odd band of companions continued their way, mumbling and yelling at each other with a passion he hadn't seen for a long time. While interesting, Naruto found himself confused about what to do. Were these the bad people that his father always told him about? They sure looked odd. Nothing like himself, though the one with scales had a human-looking face. Should he approach them? He wondered if they had any treats. Maybe he could find something new to eat. With that thought, the boy found his stomach grumbling and his arm twitching in a finicky response to his desires. The scarlet appendage began to boil and drip as the blonde youth watched it in wonder. Drip drop, the substance would fall to the ground and cool. Hey, what the hell are you doing here? Naruto's head shot up to see one of the creatures staring at him in wonderment and confusion, an expression that slowly shifted to a suspicious one. Did it pick up the sound of his arm bubbling? Hearing a slight pop, his attention left the furred, bipedal creature as he watched his arm boil with increasing frequency. The small boy felt warmth on his face as a sour smell intruded upon his nostrils, causing his visage to scrunch up. When did his feet leave the floor? You lil bastard, were you eavesdropping on us? If you don't want me to snap your neck, you best tell me where the rest of your friends are. Naruto pondered slightly before pouting and answering. Don't know, father is missing. I was looking for him, but I couldn't find him. His response was the beast's increased agitation, but rather than aggression, it tilted its horned head. To the boy's surprise, the beast began to sniff him before moving back and snorting in confusion. Jerry, what's the damn hold up? I don't like working for a half-blood either, but you know our orders. We gotta get to that boat before it sets off. The serpentine creature looked up at its furred comrade and took a sniff. Hey, what the hell is that? The monsters stared at the boy in silent contemplation, nothing but the drip-drop of heated metal falling to the floor. Henry was a lamia that had seen many things, been around for a long time, and traveled the far world. But he would be the first to admit that he had no idea what he was looking at. Well, that's not entirely true. The lamia knew what it was looking at but not what it was smelling. The boy was human, at least partly. That was obvious. If the boy was a monster, he was one Henry had never seen before, and if he was a god, then they would have already been vaporized. So that left some kind of something? The beast's first thought was that maybe it was one of those clear-sighted mortals, but that didn't seem quite right. Then the serpent thought that perhaps the boy was simply a demigod that rolled into something that smelled weird. Plenty of weird stuff in the labyrinth. Still, as Henry studied the boy, his eyes began lowering to the scarlet appendage that almost looked as if it was alternating between a solid and a liquid. The serpentine creature had never seen something like that before. It might have been a weapon of sorts or a blessing, but its weird aesthetic seemed more likened to that of a curse. It wouldn't have been the first time a god went out of their way to scorn a mortal. Plenty of souls in the underworld had horrid tales to tell. For all Henry knew, perhaps the gods were jealous of the boy's shimmering eyes or even how bright his hair was. Hell, seeing how unique the boy looked, they might have even tried something and punished the boy for escaping. Honestly, the title god was one of power, not morality, with very few exceptions. One asterisk. Just as the Lamia continued to speculate what exactly they should do with the boy, it noticed that the arm had begun to distort and twist around itself as if coiling like a snake. Henry couldn't help but find it rather enrapturing. Henry, wake the hell up. What should we do with the brat? You're the one in charge. Huh? Oh right, the boy. Well, protocol dictates that we should take anything of interest to the old one, so I guess. To hell with that. Henry found himself interrupted by another monster in their group, another rather large one. A cyclops. I say we cook him. I haven't had decent flesh in 3 days. This boy doesn't have any use for our master. There's no reason to tow him with us. Yeah, Charlie's right. Let's just eat him. We can divvy him up. Us big ones should get the most, though. Henry found himself scowling as he was interrupted by shouts of agreement and some yells of unfairness at the last part. This was why he was in charge. As strong as the other monsters were, their brains were smoother than his immaculate scales. The Lamia found himself about to growl out when something changed in the air. It was like being within a thunderous forest, only for all the animals to suddenly go silent. Henry's body froze on instinct, and by the lack of his comrades' voices, they had done the same. What was going on? What could possibly have such a terrifying presence? A voracious gaze watched all of them, and oddly enough, the Lamia found his senses pointing back to the boy within Jerry's grasp. More accurately, the arm that now held a multitude of barbs and stakes. Then his eyes met its eye. What the foo? Henry soon found himself hooked like fish, flailing slightly before his body stilled and exploded in a shower of gold. Naruto wasn't sure what was going on, but he found it rather pretty. The boy watched as the group of creatures was run through by the red barbed chains exploding from his hands. He was slightly worried when the first monster had let out a small gasp, but his fear calmed when golden sparkles exploded from it. Each monster the chains touched lit up like fireworks, and in a way, it almost felt like his arm was presenting him with a small show. The boy rationalized that the monsters must have used some kind of technique like his friends had. Instead of disappearing in a cloud of white smoke, they did so in a boom of wonderment. If Naruto had access to his other arm, he would have clapped slightly, but his left arm saw fit to do its own thing, so the boy simply waited. When it was done, multiple piles of gold dust sat in front of him, and he found himself watching for the monsters to reappear, but he supposed they left instead. Perhaps it was one of those tactics father told him about? Nevertheless, Naruto watched as the chains retracted back into his arm with a small chink, and then felt as his appendage began to lead him towards the piles that lay before him. Once he was in front of a large mound, the mass having been made by the one they called Henry, a rather odd name, the blonde sat down. His scarlet arm scooped up the gold dust and then brought it before his face. Naruto blew on it and let out a small giggle as the sand floated away like honeyed dandelion seeds. He felt a small tickle within the limb and then a slight feeling of contentedness. When the arm brought another batch to his face, he blew once more, only for the scarlet arm to raise it above his breath. The boy pouted but felt another tickle in his arm, as well as a sense of mirth, before it lowered once more. Shimmering eyes watched the sand and couldn't help but wonder what the arm desired. If he wasn't supposed to play with it, what should he do with it? Naruto felt his stomach growl again, and as a response, his arm jostled the sand once more. Is this food? Once again, a slight ticklish feeling was his response, and so the boy looked at the grainy substance before shrugging. He did say he wanted to try some new treats, besides, his arm hadn't led him wrong so far. So, the boy opened his maw slightly as his hand poured the golden dust in, then, he took little time to sample it and hummed at the taste. There was a slightly spicy, almost burning, flavor to it before a larger, though somewhat subtle, sweetness kicked in. It wasn't a robust taste, but Naruto found he quite liked it, so when the arm brought more, he was perfectly content with allowing it to feed him. As he ate, a golden glow enveloped him as an exceptionally bright source of light emanated from his back. From it, a small vent of chakra formed before it began to grow in size and substance, a golden syrup-like liquid developing and solidifying. The result was several ingots of semi-translucent material that glowed along with their creator. By the time Naruto had finished, the boy had looked around to see a few other odd things. A large eye, some fangs, claws, and a glass full of green liquid. They didn't look particularly tasty, and he was relatively content now anyways. Naruto then looked behind him towards the ingots that came from his back. Odd, they never stacked themselves so neatly before. Then again, he never really paid attention to them as he ate. His father always took care of it for him. Father, right, he had to find his father. He then looked at his ingots again and realized he wasn't sure what to do with them as none of his friends were there. With the nonchalance that only youth could give, Naruto shrugged and simply left them behind. He didn't particularly feel like carrying them, not like he could do anything with them anyways. And so, the boy left the veritable crime scene, nothing but a few trophies, gashes along the walls, and alluring ingots as evidence of the slaughter that took place. Naruto continued walking, humming as his scarlet limb idly stroked the wall. After his hunger had been sated, the boy decided he might as well keep looking for his father, so that's what he did. Truthfully, the golden-haired youth had no idea where he was going, but he figured he'd eventually find some new friends if he kept moving forward. Click. A small noise beneath his feet was followed by a much bolder one from above. Naruto felt his left arm rise and a small weight grace his form as he glanced up to inspect the offender. The boy looked to see a large stone column above him, one that the scarlet arm had cracked open as it pierced inside. With a little jerk, his arm wrenched itself free, and along with it came a silver object enclosed within the metal fist. A crunch was heard, and the curious trinket was crushed and tossed behind him with one motion. This place is kinda weird. What do you think, Anata? 2 asterisk. The arm's response was a pleasant thrum as they continued forward, the limb stopping any form of trap that encroached upon their space. The boy continued humming a song, having figured that he could sing for Anata as thanks since his new friend was helping him. The two quickly got into a routine. Naruto would hum a song, Anata would destroy the obstacles that kept presenting themselves, and Naruto would get bored. When such a thing happened, as it often did, the arm would then thrum out a new beat that Naruto would hum, and they would entertain themselves as they continued their journey. As the boy became bored again, his arm released a minute vibration. Initially, Naruto believed that it would signal out a new tune, but that didn't seem to be the case. No, this pinprick was not one of mirth but one of annoyance, of warning. Well, a new face means new choices. Oh, what fun. Come, stand before Janus. Naruto had no idea how to respond to that as he was still confused about what he was looking at. It was a man, or perhaps a statue, with 2 faces, both grinning at him wildly with glee, yet even more unnatural was how its form flickered. It looked almost blurry, as if his eyes were unfocused and his vision impaired. The boy rubbed at his shimmering orbs slightly but found no difference in his perception. Then one of the speaker's faces closed its eyes, and when it opened them, it did not look pleased. It didn't seem the other face would be his friend either, as it quickly copied the actions of the first. 2 horrid scowls met his concerned visage. Who are you? None escapes our gift. We see both paths, that which was and that which is doomed to be. Accursed boy, bad boy, not very good boy. How dare you hide your truth from us? The 2 heads wailed. At those words, Naruto found himself flinching, and Anata quickly began to respond as it bubbled and boiled with a vengeance. I'm Naruto. I'm just trying to find my father. I don't know where I am. Can you help me? With that, the being's response quickly changed to grins once more. Of course. Janus is helpful, we present the choices. You must only choose. But here's a risk you unaligned. One step forwards means no steps backward. The trail you shall walk will be one of your own decision, fate itself entwining with your ruling. Are you prepared for such a thing? 3 asterisk. Well, you are. Such a brave little boy, such a doomed little boy. The other gods might not feel it, but I can. I see in you many things, none clear, but many ruinations in your wake. Your fate is one of which we are unsure, but one event reigns. A marriage of sorts, a true union in which only one might remain. Love, hate, courage, fear, joy, despair. Oh, your consequences consume you. However, this choice is not yours to choose. It's his. Naruto felt sweat begin to collect on his brow as his heart rate heightened, the gentle thrums of Hinata the only thing keeping him from running. What was wrong with this creature? Its manic voice twisted between a wail and joyful glee. Warped eyes twitched in anticipation before it asked a question. Door 1 or door 2? Choose. I don't know, maybe I should just wait for Fath. Not you. The boy flinched back, the deep and steady baritone surprising him. The choice is his. As long as he is here, it will always be his. At first, Naruto believed that perhaps this Janus was questioning his Hinata, but seeing as the limb didn't respond, he was left with a blank. Who was he? So be it. You've chosen number 2, and so you walk the road not taken. Yet this shall be no frost. Your path shall lead you to a door even I cannot see. I find myself eager to witness such an event. As for you, small boy, I hope we are bereft of such an audience the next time we meet. For as long as he walks within your shadow, you will never be able to witness my calling. The being named Janus snapped, and the paths around Naruto closed. Hinata began to bristle as it readied for a confrontation, but a small tear opening was the only other event. The boy looked at it with caution, the swirling rift dancing before his eyes as it showed flowers and trees as far as his gaze could see. First comes the trial, then comes the haven. From there on, I can see nothing. Survive, little miracle, for many eyes watch you, and more shall also come to judge you. With that, the flickering being vanished, leaving naught but the rift that slowly drifted closer. Naruto looked at the abnormality with trepidation, unsure if he should even enter, yet he knew he had no other choice. No other path to follow. With a calming thrum from Hinata, he pressed his small arms into the shifting portrait. A small resistance met him, but it quickly gave away as his eyes were blinded by a radiance that invited anything and promised nothing. Sea-green eyes roamed the golden expanse before him, taking in the smells and enjoying the light breeze that grazed him gently. Oh yeah, for a demigod dream, this was pretty nice. Now, Percy would be the first to admit that he wished for a bit of actual sleep before he had another prophetic dream, but if the boy had to have one, he was glad it was peaceful. Rather beautiful too. The boy took in a breath and exhaled, allowing the surroundings to take away his fatigue and exhaustion. A slow blink and a small yawn made him want to rest upon the golden grass and dream beneath the blue skies above. Wait, wasn't he already sleeping? He blinked in wonderment before shrugging and deciding he deserved a break, dream or not. Besides, not everyone could say they fought a cyclops and won, right? Or saved their friend from being married and then nearly killed by said cyclops. Yeah, Polyphemus was a weird one. The boy was just happy that Odysseus blinded him when he did, or it could have ended a lot worse. Hello. Green eyes flew open in shock, twisting around to see. What exactly was he seeing? The figure was small, childlike even, with a featureless visage that seemed to blur and distort no matter how he looked at it. You always were rather scatterbrained, but we suppose we've always liked that about you. Who are you? Percy's eyes narrowed in suspicion. ADHD flaring up, pulse quickening, and blood flowing as the instincts, further tempered by his second quest, quickly arose. Then they simply disappeared. Wah, don't be afraid. What kind of person harms their brother? We care for you after all. Tell that to Polyphemus, he sure tried. Actually, Percy really needed to talk to his father about that one. The whole weird family tree was beginning to get complicated. Oh, so you've just met him. We see, that's when we are. Right, talking white blob. He'd have to ponder such things when he was finally alone, but for now. How did you know what I was thinking? Well, we are within your dreams, and your dreams take place in your head. The being then moved as if excited or smiling. Don't worry, though. We don't want to see the mushy stuff you think about Annie, so we didn't look too deep. Pale cheeks blushed amongst a bed of black hair before the boy stammered confusedly. His response was a small giggle before the being began to float and warp in form. We could talk to you here because this is near where our fates first met, but now we breach a place where we can no longer exist. Fate is a weird thing, time too, but that just shows how little humans understand it. The being then hesitated before turning forlorn. We're not supposed to be here, and soon, we no longer will be. Our dreams have been made reality, and the cost was something we were willing to pay. A piece of us survives now, but we haven't been fully awakened here. It's only a matter of time, though. It isn't right for us to be here, but we couldn't help it. We wanted to see you one more time, we wanted to see Sis too, but we had to choose. Tell her we're sorry, that we love her too and that it tore us apart to choose. What are you talking about? Who are you, and what sister? But it seemed like Percy would never get an answer to his question as the world seemed to come alive. The earth beneath his feet began to shake and twist, a cold voice speaking from the cracks as the earth itself began to wake. Now, child. You are not supposed to be here. Go on now, we will watch over you as you sleep, but now that you have awakened, you must go sit upon your throne. The young demigod watched as the earth rose the white blob towards the sky, cradling the figure as if they were its child. The being looked above towards the blue sky, and Percy joined their gaze as the atmosphere slowly began to glow red. It looked like a star, a scarlet star that burned so brightly that the sky itself reflected its glow. It was too radiant to look at, yet Percy could feel its gaze, not on himself, but on the figure offered to it by the chittering field. We know. Thank you, Grandma. Percy, be safe, don't be reckless, and stop being so self-sacrificial. I guess that last one is hypocrisy coming from me, but I can be hypocritical when you've done it so many times. I guess this is goodbye, but don't worry, we succeeded. Everyone's safe, and everyone can finally rest. Take care of him, won't you? Keep my ancestors safe so that I might be born again. With that, the being rose, and the world began to brighten beyond what Percy could handle. Radiance burned away at his mind as an ominous voice reverberated through his mind. When the earth met the moon, the first was born. When the star met the sun, a pact was made. When the forge met the child, love was destined. The union, the marriage between two beings as such a king and its throne to bestow upon the world a field of gold. Fate consumed and remade, true peace found at last. Two orbs snapped open to see a dark wood ceiling, but that was the least of his worries. The boy quickly sprinted out of the room, nearly knocking over a barrel, one of which he didn't remember being there prior, before he finally found it, the side of the boat. The sound of choking and gagging quickly made itself known as the young demigod began to heave his dinner into the ocean. Well, I never thought I'd see this. A child of Poseidon sick at sea, oh the irony. The somewhat endearing but rather snarky voice quickly identified the speaker to the still heaving boy. Well, at least it wasn't Clarice, that would have just been hell. When the boy finally got everything out of his stomach, he wiped his mouth and sunk to his knees before groaning. Geez, Percy, are you alright? Percy wanted to answer her, he really did because he was starting to feel rather foolish, but he couldn't. His mind would go back to the Scarlet Star, and his body would tremor and nearly begin to dry heave. Don't be afraid. What kind of person harms their brother? We care for you after all. And just like that, the feeling diminished. Like the tension of a spring slowly releasing and relaxing again, the boy almost felt like he was back to his old self. What was going on? What was that white blob? The son of Poseidon was worried that the stakes of whatever they were doing just got a lot higher, and if he was being honest, he was sure they weren't prepared for what was to come. Hey, seaweed brain, stop ignoring me. Percy looked back up at her to see stormy, gray eyes staring closely at his own sea-green ones. He felt a slight blush on his face at her close proximity before trying to answer her. It immediately went wrong. Percy, that's absolutely foul. The honey-haired girl yelled, her nose aflame from his horrid, vomit-smelling burp. This time, the blush that grew on his face was from a different type of embarrassment. Then, as if Tyche herself held some vendetta against him, an enraged voice cleared the air. Baxter, who did this to you? Two pairs of eyes looked towards the voice to see Clarice, of all people, finicking with a barrel. Oh? It wasn't just a barrel, but instead some war ghoul of a skeleton that, for some reason, was wearing the barrel like a suit of armor. Percy was wondering how that barrel got in his way before. It explained a lot. The veteran skeleton shakily pointed a finger towards the still recovering boy before promptly passing out. Percy, why couldn't he just get a break? Drip drop. Shimmering eyes opened to see twisting clouds and darkened skies. The youth stayed on the ground for a bit before feeling his body tense and flinch. The boy shook slightly before he felt the tears on his face increase, slight sniffles becoming a wail of pain and sorrow. The events had finally caught up with the small child. His father was gone, his friends were gone, his home was gone, and he was thrust into a place he had never seen before once again. The boy wasn't sure if he was ever going home, and for the first time in years, he felt his heart tear and throb at the emotions. He had felt sadness before, in fact, before his father, that was often all he had felt. But over the years, his father had become a constant in his life, a constant that was always there when his friends finally had to leave and he could no longer see them again. From being surrounded by friends on all sides, he now found himself alone with no one he could call upon, and that brought an alien anguish. Though it made no sense for Naruto to feel so, the youth felt abandoned, as if his father and friends had left him behind, and he didn't know why. The boy turned on his right side and simply laid there as a cool breeze clawed at his form, taking what little warmth he had. Yet, just as his form began to quiver again, it stopped abruptly. The reason? An odd, familiar warmth filled his form, all of it originating from his left side. Naruto felt his body shift slightly, a metallic appendage gently wiping his eyes and comforting him in his time of need. Some would find such an act odd, but the boy could only feel the pain in his chest ebb away as Anata tittered and hummed lightly. The blond boy sniffed lightly before sitting himself up and cradling the scarlet limb with his right arm. Thank you, you're right. I can't give up, I still have to find father. As if his body wanted to alert him of another thing he had to do, his stomach growled pitiably. And I guess I need some food too. Father always said I should when I'm hungry, right Anata? The metallic limb's response was another low rumble, and the boy giggled lightly before wiping off his pants with his right hand and shaking whatever else he could off. With a small hop, the boy was on his feet and took in his surroundings with a closer eye. The walls were a mixture of crumbling ruins and enduring walls of stone. Beautiful flowers of all shapes, sizes, and colors poked out from every corner as they bloomed beautifully amongst the dun backdrop. However, the most noticeable thing was a sky full of swirling clouds that funneled downwards like a tornado was soon to appear. Yet, oddly enough, the garden seemed entirely calm, only having a slight breeze that moved around the boy and ruffled the flowers. Naruto approached the various blooms and touched them with his right hand, watching as their blooms brightened and they ruffled further as if in appreciation. The boy smiled slightly as he continued, letting his hand run through the plants, thorns parting before the limb and petals grasped at his fingers lightly. The boy giggled, cheered up by the experience as he enjoyed his time being outside of his home for a small while. It had been years since Naruto had last seen a garden, the petite plants his father brought him notwithstanding, and even longer since he had seen the sky. If there was one thing he missed when he lived with his father, it was the freedom and the joy he got from being outside. He had missed the skies, the blossoms that would grow in spring, and the rare flowers that welcomed him in winter. Once his father had adopted him, the boy had never left their home as he was always told it was too dangerous for him out there. Those people that existed outside their happy little family, Naruto knew how they could be, how mean and harsh their gazes and words were. Yet, he still couldn't find it in himself to scorn the outside world, for he had always loved it, and the blooms always welcomed him back. Brought back to his senses by his stomach once more, the boy looked around in search of food. Excuse me, can any of you show me where to find something to eat? The flowers quivered as several roots grew from the ground and pointed further into the garden. Thanking them, Naruto followed the roots as they directed him forward and around the winding paths. A humble tune filled the air as the boy hummed out small songs along with Anata, enjoying the walk if only because he got to see new things. The roots would prod him lightly, causing the boy to let out small peals of laughter before they wrapped around him and raised him above the debris that blocked his path. Once he was past the barriers, the boy was privy to countless rows of trees that bore wondrous fruits of various forms. Hungry and determined, Naruto made his way to one of the many trees and reached out his hand, ready to attempt climbing the giant plant, but was stopped as fruit entered his gaze. The boy looked up to see a branch bending downwards, offering him the fruit that he desired. He took in the rich, maroon color of the jewel before him and grasped it gently. The boy sat against the tree, took a bite of his gift, and made himself at home. He made quick work of the treat and felt his arm thrum in response to him finishing. The boy perked up as the arm tittered again, this time in warning, and the boy found himself raised into verdant forage. Confused and somewhat alarmed, the boy attempted to ask a question until he heard a voice below. Odd, I could have sworn I heard noises. It's been some time since someone was foolish enough to steal from the garden. Beneath the tree was a woman of alarming beauty, boasting tan skin, dark hair, and even darker eyes. Cloaked in robes of white, the being glided across the jade grass and slowly began to spin and hum a gentle tune. The spins quickened, then slowed and transitioned into small trots before starting anew. Naruto had never seen anything quite like it, even when he glimpsed upon festivals from the shadows of the Konoha. There was a certain grace and fluidity within the movements that were alien to him yet enamored him all the same. The woman swirled and sang as the amber light of the evening bathed the garden in its embrace. As if in response, the dance grew quicker, spun faster, and sang louder. The garden shimmered, and wind graced the plants as it followed the steps of the dancer. Naruto tried to lean forward, hoping to gain a better look in the incredible spectacle, but in doing so, the blonde youth caused the leaves surrounding him to ruffle. Yet that wasn't the main problem. For as the boy began to digest the fruit he had been so gracious given, his body began to glow with a crimson light, one that the dancer quickly took notice of. Ebony eyes snapped up to stare into his shimmering orbs, and the small boy found himself frozen by fear. A thief? No, a man? It seemed Naruto couldn't catch a break. What exactly is that? The question came from a tan woman with ebony hair, a woman who seemed both incredibly interested and confused. The reason? Well, it was none other than the blonde-haired, something within her sister's grasp. Can't you tell Aegle? It's a man. What, a man? It looked like no man she had seen. She didn't know men came so small. The youngest she had seen was the mini Hermes who came and was scarred all that time ago. Was this really a man? Where had Arethyia even found this being? How do you know? It looks like a small version of a man. I tried checking, but his red arm didn't take too kindly to that. Indeed, the man less Hesperides saw a metallic red arm connected to where its left elbow ended. Just another reason why she was unsure that this thing was indeed a man. Either way, the small size had made it hard to find it in herself to dance the tiny creature to death. If it was a woman or even a monster, she'd be all for it. However, men were an incredibly rare luxury, so, small as he may be, they should cherish this time. Besides, his blonde hair and shimmering eyes did make the man a rather beautiful specimen. Was he some kind of demigod? Where did you find him? In the garden, he was hiding inside one of the fruit trees. The tree wasn't pleased when I tried to get him down. It didn't seem to like being separated from the man, so it took some time. Well, the dirtied appearance of her sister suddenly made a lot of sense. Though the Hesperides figured it could have been from the red arm, she wasn't entirely sure how that worked. If the trees were so protective of the boy, did that make him a son of Demeter? He did have the blonde hair her form often entailed, but his shimmering eyes seemed more like the work of Aphrodite. Did they? No, if they had decided to do union, the boy wouldn't be so far from Olympus. Then again, the gods, specifically the Olympians, were odd in every sense of the word. Arethyia then whispered, "Can I keep him?" And there was the question. Aegle had no idea what they should do with the boy. As enamored as her sisters were with men, Aegle remembered having to exile one of their own for her treachery. A betrayal spurned by one such man, in fact. Still, whether because she herself held affection for the rare opposite or simply because of the man's unique looks, she couldn't find it in herself to hate him. "Nei-san, my name is Naruto." "Right, Naruto, the man." The still confused Hesperides watched as her sister Arethyia continued to fawn over this, Naruto, just as she knew her other sisters would. Well, Aegle supposed she couldn't kill the man lest she desired a riot among her other sisters. That's the last thing they needed. Father wouldn't be very happy if his plan for the moon goddess was foiled due to their inner conflict. Father, that was another thought. Should they show the creature to their patriarch? Egil wasn't sure if the burdened man would be very fond of an unknown showing up so close to the time of action. Would he see the golden-haired youth as a spy? Or try to use him as a hostage? No, perhaps if the child was a woman, but Artemis reportedly cared little for men. Then again, there was talk that she did show care for the younger men. What did she call them? Boys? Is that what Naruto was? Her thoughts were interrupted by the feeling of a small hand wrapping around her own. She looked down to see the small boy holding her hand absently as he watched Arathea run outside. It looked like her sister was going to go round up their other sisters. "Nay-san, I'm hungry." The woman raised an eyebrow before her face turned to shock as a large warble filled the air. With a sigh, Egil made up her mind, she might as well feed the boy. She wouldn't kill him, she couldn't bring herself to do so, they would simply have to wait to see what their father thought on the matter. Hopefully, it wouldn't turn out too badly. Where in the hell are those fools? Luke Castellan had dealt with a lot of shit, and it seemed he just couldn't rid himself of incompetence. All the damn beasts had to do was bring themselves to the ship. Was that so much to ask? Worse even, their large group was one of the few to have any way of navigating the labyrinth, so here he was fumbling and trying to find them. "Sir, there's no need to get worked up. Perhaps you would like to release some stress?" The young teen had to hold back a snarl for the monster that offered such a thing at a time such as this. An Empusa. Of course, one of them would be the ones to offer such a thing. Still, he didn't need dissent within his ranks at such a crucial time, so he simply waved her away and sighed. Sometimes it was hard being the villain. Really, creating obstacles for the heroes and walking the fine line between being a cool, beloved antagonist and a hated, horrid one was difficult. And did anyone ever thank him? No. Kronos only mumbled and growled about how he would kill the Olympians, and the monsters always either gave him slack or looked at him as if he was the most succulent thing since cows were bred. The worst part of the last piece was that he could never tell quite why they were looking at him that way. He hoped it was to eat him. The blonde boy looked back towards Chelsea, the Empusa, and shivered at her intense gaze. Yes, for his sanity, he would hope she was only craving his blood. "Hey boss, you might want to see this." Ah, Barry, one of the few monsters he could count on. Why couldn't the rest be like him? Nevertheless, Luke looked at what exactly his favored creature was pointing at. What he found was somewhat confusing. A large pile of ingots, which looked like semi-translucent gilded glass, sat in a neat stack before them. They glowed dimly in the light with an alien beauty he had only seen within Hera's garden. Then again, he didn't have very fond memories of that place. "Grace, go pick it up." The aforementioned Grace was a harpy who had chosen to ally herself with their shared leader. However, she had a rather snooty personality, one such that incredibly annoyed Luke. Yeah, he wouldn't miss her if something happened. "Why'd I have to go pick it up? Send Barry." "Hell no. Get your feathered ass over there and pick it up, or I will have you plucked." The feathered creature gulped before muttering as she moved towards the glowing ingots. The honeyed rays from the beautiful bars enraptured her, and soon she could think of nothing else. Their radiance took her sight, then her hearing, and finally any sense of self or surroundings. The creature could feel her every breath and found her heart racing faster with every step towards the miraculous bars. Finally, her finger touched one of the delicate gifts, and she could only pick it up and cradle it. Then she heard it whisper, murmuring to her as it shifted and settled onto her form. It was a child, one that was nursed by her, it was her daughter. Her fingers danced across its form, a loving smile growing upon her visage. The smile stayed upon her face, even as golden, clawed fingers graced her throat and began to tighten. "Ah, he's adorable. I just want to pinch his cheeks." Egil watched as Arethusa continued to pamper the small boy, though it didn't seem that he minded if his happy munching was any indication. Her other sisters continued to coo and pat his hair as they brought new treats for Naruto to try. All sorts of fruits were brought, some she had tried, but others were as alien as they came. She felt a form settle next to her and looked to see Hespera watching the boy along with her. "It's been a while since our sisters have been so happy. Ever since we forced Zoe away, things just haven't been the same. I've missed these relaxed moments." Egil knew what Hespera meant. While she wasn't particularly fond of Layden, in fact, she would say she rather disliked the serpent, Zoe's care and love for the creature brought a modicum of peace to the garden. Ever since they forced her away, that peace had become twisted and warped into stress and apprehension. While part of her knew that it was their duty to protect Hera's golden apples, was it truly worth losing one of their own over such a thing? What had the gods ever done for them? Naught but shunned them and cast them here to be their servants. They were guilty of their father's sins, just as Calypso had been. Yes, perhaps our sisters will be able to enjoy themselves for a while. But still, we will need to show him to father. Sooner rather than later, lest we wish to bring his anger upon us as well. At these words, Aegle witnessed Hespera's growing annoyance. Out of all of them, Hespera was the only one who was vocally against banishing Zoe, so too was she the only one who clearly displayed frustration with their father's machinations. Aegle knew Hespera felt that their father would simply drag them further into servitude should the Titans' plans fail. Knowing their father's current history with the gods, Aegle couldn't find it in herself to disagree with her sister. Wow, so pretty. The two watchful Hesperides looked towards the commotion, only to see the other daughters of Atlas watching as the boy began to glow. First, it started as a brilliant orange, then a blinding white, a covetous purple, and many other incredible shades. Finally, they bore witness to a flash that blinded them, only to gape at what they saw when they opened their eyes. Metal? Hespera's whisper brought Aegle's focus back to the present. She watched frozen as her sisters inched closer to the ingots, trapped in fear and worry. Were they being betrayed by the boy? Had he somehow produced weapons to destroy them? Aegle could do nothing but watch as Hesperia, their youngest sister, inched closer to a maroon ingot. Wait, don't touch it. Yet Aegle was too late. She could do nothing as Hesperia snapped her head towards her, her mouth opened in shock and fear. The metal bubbled within her hands as it began to melt atop her palms. Aegle's eyes closed, not wishing to see what would happen next. How could she have allowed this to happen? It's warm. What? A pair of midnight orbs opened to see what seemed to be a metal butterfly? The once frozen daughter of Atlas watched as the butterfly flapped its crimson wings and flew lightly, followed closely by multiple other ones in what looked like a dance. Hesperia moved along with them as they added to her steps and graced her shoulders and hair like small ornaments. When her sister stopped, the colony of metal creations had blended upon her hair and white gown in elaborate, elegant designs as if they had always been there and had not recently come to life and flew around. As she was about to speak, Arethusa gasped in delight, and Aegle's eyes were drawn to another spectacle. She watched as her sister looked into an azure pane. Thin and colored like the very sky, the looking glass showed images that changed whenever her sister moved her hand along its edge. The circular object would show moving pictures of men and women in suits sitting at odd desks, people looking down at the visor as they threw white crumbs towards the glass, and then youths walking in abhorrent clothes as they seemingly laughed and spoke. What was going on? This didn't make any sense. However, a yawn drew her attention as the source of all this confusion began to drift to sleep. No, she needed explanations, and she needed them now. However, it seemed Aegle wouldn't get them soon as the boy soon found himself resting in Hespera's lap as she slowly stroked his hair and welcomed him into Morpheus's realm. Hespera, what are you doing? We still don't know what's going on. However, her sister only responded to her low hiss with a mirthful gaze before turning it towards a violet ingot within her other hand. Hespera closed her eyes and focused before the bar bubbled and shifted, becoming a picture-perfect replica of the Hesperide. If that wasn't surprising enough, Aegle was shell-shocked when it then spoke. Aegle, I think we found something rather amazing. Luke had no idea where it went wrong. One moment, they watched as Grace slowly inched towards the odd metal. The next, she was being strangled by what seemed to be a golden mirror image of herself. The son of Hermes would never admit it to anybody, but he had been frozen in both surprise and fear when he witnessed the horrid event. Yet what surprised him more was when the creature stopped upon Grace passing out and, instead of killing her, opened its mouth to impossible size as it placed the harpy inside. It then closed its maw, looked their way, and tilted its head in curiosity before its chest seemed to bloat, spewing out a cloud of golden dust. Luke found himself backpedaling and was glad he did as a centaur began to scream and claw at wherever the dust caressed it. The harpy replica began to stride towards them, each step heavier than the last, the other golden ingots merging with its form as it began to distort and grow. Numerous monsters froze in fear, its presence like lead, its power drowning the dulled tunnel they found themselves trapped in. A few monsters quickly engaged, attempting to take down the still-growing beast, but it was all for naught. It snatched them up, bending their forms until they could bend no more. What was left was naught but golden dust that was quickly consumed by the metal monstrosity before it spewed out golden ash once more. It seemed indomitable, an obstacle that could not be cleared and would stand until the end of time. Yet that was nothing compared to its voice. A deep, old groan, nothing like the annoying harpy that was Grace. At first, nothing but choking noises and hisses came from the statue-like being, but soon it came to speak. You of sullied blood, you and your horrid beasts, bear witness to the miracle. Worship the power of creation, for the coming of a true God is nigh. The forge shall remake this world in the consort's image, and true peace shall be achieved at last. Thus is prophesied, thus it shall be. If Luke had any doubt before, it had long since been erased. It indeed was hard to be the bad guy. It started as whispers, so soft that none could even make out what it was they said. They repeated religiously, slowly growing into a chant, a promise, a prophecy. Yet just as they became discernible, they were replaced with howls, roars, and horrid laughter. Their volume clawed at the ears of those who bore witness to them, ringing through the ground and escaping through the collapsed ceiling. The voices mixed together, a cacophony of rage, malice, and madness. They acted like such as well. A sea of crimson crystals surged forward, warping around the screaming, blonde youth he had come to know so well. They tore the flesh from their victims, devouring and finally dissolving them within the glass-like structures. They were a living prison, a cruel warden that took satisfaction in the pain it caused its inmates, its talons scraping at the cells and its tittering haunting the very walls. When had Danzo felt such a thing? Who could have known that such power lay within his own son? His breathing began to quicken, and his form flinched amongst the restraints that bound him. Was he going to die? No, he wasn't ready. He hadn't seen the world that was promised, he wanted to witness it as well. Had he been abandoned by his miracle? Left to rot and die before this madness? Do you have so little faith in us? That we would abandon you? Are you not our prophet, the shepherd who shall lead these sinful lambs to us? Oh, how could he be so blind? Of course, he hadn't been abandoned. He need only spectate such madness, not indulge in it. We are not the false beings knaves prayed to. We are so much more. Fear not, for that which lies before you is but another agent of our mercy. Look upon the bestial vessel of our wrath. Watch as it culls the rot away from the roots. Go forth, do what must be done, and bring our faith into this cursed world. Images flashed, instructions, feelings, and suddenly Danzo knew what was to be. His son would return to them eventually. It was decided. He need only put the pieces into place and wait. And so, when he saw the various Jonin being consumed by the crystal mass, Danzo wept. But he watched as he knew it was preordained. For they would rest until it was time for them to witness the honeyed rays of gold, they would slumber and be with their god. A new set of roars filled the room as the once broken, straw-haired youth rose. The last remaining Grace tender twitched, his once armored, black cloak bubbling and melting into his flesh. The ebony creation looked upon the opposing ninja with a face of apathy before its form rushed towards its enemies. It forced the shinobi to heal, palming them away, knocking them aside, and coming to rest before the tired, one-eyed elder. It stood over him, and the crystals surged around them, not a scrape touching their form. Its crimson eyes looked down at him before a whistling filled the air. This one was bereft of the bestial undertone that was present. The war hawk looked towards the source of the screeching wind to see an Anbu wielding a kunai laced with wind chakra. The shinobi pitched their arm back and sent it hurtling towards the head of this madness. His son. Danzo felt himself hoisted up, and without a second thought, dredged up all the chakra he could and spewed forth a wind bullet. The projectile grazed the kunai, and its arc was diverted, though only partly, as a young scream filled the air. The crimson crystals reacted accordingly, becoming more defensive, rushing to form a wall between the wretches and the favored host. Yet, in their retreat, they left behind a piece of the very being they were born to protect. A left-handed forearm lay still upon the cold floor, solemn, forgotten, and abandoned. No, Danzo knew this to be false, for the miracle had told him the truth. And as the elder looked upon the severed limb, he saw its fingers twitch and knew that the process had begun. All of this for a new world. They must be willing to sacrifice even their very hearts for it to pass. Get up, you old bastard. A face heaved itself upwards, dirtied with mud, sweat, and blood. Whatever grace it once held was forgotten, an oblation towards the god that had been so merciful. Danzo looked with a dull eye, his other orb taken just as his scarlet blessing had been. With his remaining hand, the elder pulled himself from the ground, standing on frail legs and breathing the harsh air of the gallows. This was where traitors were sent to wither away once caught, and lucky him, his cell was one that Hiruzen had held onto for his once favored student. Danzo supposed his old friend didn't see any reason to waste the space any longer. Besides the guard's voice, the dank space was like the grave. There were no other noises, each cell primed with silencing seals to ensure no conversations between convicts. As maddening as this was, it was nothing compared to the secondary effect. The seals resonated within the cells as well, dulling if not entirely muting the insides of each and every room. First, the person would hear only their own thoughts, then their heartbeats, and finally silence. Humans were not meant to live in these conditions, and such an existence drove many traitors to madness. Danzo had been here but 2 weeks, yet already he had found himself humbled. The Warhawk couldn't help but wonder, if he didn't have his god, would his sanity still be intact? "Didn't I tell you to move?" The guard grabbed his bindings roughly, brows furrowed, face reddened, but Danzo couldn't find it in himself to care. They might have separated him from his blessing, but they would find it much harder to do so with his miracle. "Ah, is Hiruzen finally ready to see me? You will call Hokage-sama by his title and his title alone. You needn't shout. Besides, I doubt that after all I have done, that me simply calling him by his name will anger him any more than he already is." Just as the guard opened his mouth again, Danzo shrugged off his shackles, revealing that they had melted away into a bubbling mass around him. This was both staggering and concerning for the guard, likely due to the Warhawk's chakras still being sealed. However, for Danzo, it was a mere parlor trick compared to the dreams he had witnessed. "Come, I believe it's time for me to greet an old friend." And with that, the crippled elder stalked forward, eventually followed by the now cautious shinobi. Danzo, Hiruzen. The Sandaime had put off this meeting for a small while, whether from pettiness or to gather his thoughts was anyone's guess. For it seemed that Naruto had never been taken from Konoha, at least not by who he had initially thought. Then again, was he really surprised? No. The Warhawk had been rather adamant about making Naruto into a weapon at a young age. He was foolish to have given his teammate any mercy of doubt. Now, his old friend would find not, but the leader Hiruzen had been forced to become once more. "Did you orchestrate Kumo's kidnapping? Right to the point? Not even a cup of tea for an old friend?" Emphasis on the word, old. "I find you losing that title more and more by the day." The elder across his desk sighed, leaning back in the chair, and moving as the dull creak of his joints filled the room. "I will tell you all I know, the truth of everything. All I desire is a cup of tea. I have no reason to lie to you. My miracle desires you enlightened after all." For a second, the Hokage hesitated, but a minute's sigh was followed by the snap of fingers. Before the sound finished its echo, a shadow leapt from the corners of the room. In their hands was a tray that held a cup of tea, a bowl of rice, some fish, and another bowl of red bean soup. For many, this would be a simple meal, but for a man who had survived off water and scarce vegetables for 2 weeks, it had been a veritable feast. Hiruzen was surprised that his teammate's only response was a slight slouch of relaxation and a released breath. Perhaps he had thought he planned to have him killed? "I'm glad to see you still have your manners. I had worried you'd have slain me in a fit of rage. You have been rather high-strung recently." "And who is to blame for that?" "Touché. Ask whatever you fancy. I'll answer all you'd like." Truly? He had never heard Danzo offer such a thing to anyone. He had always been much too paranoid. Some even referred to him as the second salamander for how cautious and wary he was. Still, Hiruzen knew his teammate had his pride, and stating such a thing without physical torture was irregular. "Did you orchestrate Kumo's kidnapping?" The man tilted his head before taking a sip of his tea, likely contemplating how to answer the question. Whether to lie or for an unseen reason was unknown to the Hokage. "Now, who's paranoid? I did give you my word, after all." "Oh, don't look at me like that. You're not as hard to read as you might think. There's a reason you rarely won poker during our missions." Hiruzen could feel a slight scowl touch his lips. He rarely won because the rest of them always resorted to cheating. How? He wasn't sure, but he knew they did. "As for your question, no, I didn't. I'm sure you saw the other Kumo shinobi? A Yamanaka I adopted into my faction controlled him and kidnapped Naruto. He was originally supposed to be back up for the ambassador, but when he never showed, well, we all saw the result. Indeed, the ambassador had been captured, rather easily in fact. He was still alive, on the brink of death perhaps, but alive. Hiyashi never did like anyone getting near his, what did he call her? His little, moonflower, yes that. Hiruzen was simply glad Hitomi, *1, never got a hold of the Kumo Nin, or they might have never been able to question him. So, you admit to stealing children and adding them to your root foundation, the same foundation that I ordered disbanded all those years ago? Hiruzen wondered how Danzo would slither out of this one. An ambiguous answer? A diversion? Danzo rarely admitted to anything, so Hiruzen was caught off guard by his response. Yep, excuse me? The Hokage looked at his teammate owlishly, gray eyes peering into the lone black orb that stared back amusedly. I said yes. Fu is about 22 years old now. Naruto ended up throwing him a birthday party, so I had to figure his age his banner. I took the Yamanaka in when he was 17, after one of his teammates died during the second phase of the Chunin exams, which resulted in his failure. Birthday party? As much as he wanted to listen to the whole background of the newly rediscovered Yamanaka, he couldn't help but focus on the first part. When was the last time Danzo ever celebrated anything but perhaps wiping out a small nation? No, literally. There was once a land of meats to go along with the land of vegetables. In fact, the last time anyone celebrated Danzo's birthday, to his knowledge, was on his 15th one. It resulted in the soon-to-be war hawk throwing his cake at Homura and himself with Koharu cackling in the background. Let's skip all of the small talk, Hiruzen. I wish to eat after all. You desire to know about Naruto, correct? Indeed, Hiruzen did want to know about Naruto, but part of him was worried about what he would hear. Had his old friend turned the boy into some weapon, some emotionless monster? He flinched as memories of horrid howls and carnivorous cackling assaulted his ear. Emotionless? No. Monster? That had yet to be seen. I found the boy inside an alley on the first day Kumo had arrived. I had a few NEI agents watch over him to ensure he wasn't taken. Ideally, Kumo wouldn't even know what our Jinchuriki looked like, but the civilians have rather loose lips. Now, I wonder whose fault it might be that the civilians would know who our Jinchuriki was. The Sandaime had the decency to look sheepish at that. Perhaps it wasn't the brightest idea to listen to the last wishes of a delirious, politically green, and bleeding out man who had just had his soul reaped. Yeah, not his greatest work. Anyways, after seeing the boy's condition, I figured it'd be a mercy to induct him into root. Say what you will, but my agents are at least fed the necessary nutrition. I even allow desserts on Fridays and Sundays. The boy had been digging through trash cans, apparently being kicked out of the orphanage. While the villagers didn't descend upon him like some tiki mob with torches, their neglect was mentally and physically damaging. And there was the wince Hiruzen had been holding back. He had been rather busy dealing with the various conflicts breaking out, specifically with Kumo, and preventing Kiri's civil war from possibly spilling into some of their territories. The daimyo had made it a point that he didn't wish for his trade to be interrupted by the conflicts of a lesser nation. Still, Danzo was right about one thing, enough beating around the bush. What did you do to him, Danzo? What did you do to my successor's legacy? The warhawk silenced for a bit, a smug look forming, possibly taking joy in getting the truth of the boy's heritage out of the Sandaime's own mouth. However, the root commander's face melted back to the apathetic form it always took, dulling over words carefully. In truth, nothing. Bullshit. Danzo, you said you'd tell the truth. Now speak it before I throw you back into a cell. The man sighed before continuing. If you'd let me finish, Hiruzen, I meant to say nothing you would think. I will admit, I planned to make the boy a weapon at first, but you might say I found something much more miraculous. Again, with the talk of gods and miracles, and still Hiruzen wasn't given a straight answer. Now Hiruzen, I did say I would tell all you wished to know. However, some words are not for your ears alone, but the ears of the masses as well. What was his teammate talking about now? Had he cracked while in that cell of his? The Hokage looked down only to see an empty tray, tea, entree, soup, and all gone. He looked back up to see Danzo calmly patting his mouth with a napkin and could only wonder when he had put it all away. However, before he could ask, The door to his office suddenly burst open as a worried Chunin, huffing in exhaustion, entered. Hiruzen was about to admonish her lack of decorum but held his words as the Chunin finally caught her breath. Hokage-sama, the entire council has convened, and the elders request your presence. A meeting? He hadn't expected one, but they weren't usually too concerning. So why was the kunoichi so frenzied? The daimyo has also arrived with his madam, and they are waiting within the council room. What? Hiruzen's eyes glowed ominously as his face purpled with anger and his gaze swung towards the man who had just finished his meal. Well, Hiruzen, it would be best not to keep our landlords waiting, yes? Besides, now the greatest answer of all will be bestowed upon you. Come, witness the mighty miracle. With that, Danzo stood and strode out of the office. The kunoichi turned to look at him in surprise before returning her gaze to her leader. Anbu, with me. Rabbit, Crow, retrieve 20 more operatives and bring them to the council room ASAP. You, Chunin, go to the reserves and recruit 50 more Jonin and have them stationed on the outside. I also want Kakashi Hitaki directed to join me. Tell him if he isn't there within 3 minutes, I will have him stuck on D ranks a week for each minute he's late. Hiruzen should have known his old rival would make a play like this. Knocking him off his balance with his abnormally blunt answers and willingness to comply. While angry, the Hokage had to mentally clap his hands. Well played, old crone, well played indeed. When Toyotomi was sent a message concerning possible profit, the daimyo had to admit he was rather intrigued. Things had been boring lately, and the Earth daimyo was always so fickle and when it came to trading minerals from his land. Every time the bastard tried to overprice him for even simple things. For example, the diamonds and emeralds he had inserted into his lion statue's eyes. Why should he have to pay for the exorbitant inflation fees just because Kiri's civil war made the roads dangerous, or some new creatures made the mines infested? He never had any problems along the road with his samurai, and he had never been within one of those dust-filled crevices, so why should that affect him? He supposed he could have some leaf nin go and procure the goods for him, but he wasn't so foolish. No, he knew very well that it could lead to another great war. And believe it or not, while war might make a profit, it wasn't necessarily good for the long run. The last thing the daimyo needed was his subjects getting angry because of famine and disease, which he would then have to pay for out of his own pocket. The other daimyos might ignore the plebeian mass, but he knew how it only took one large uprising for his head to end up on a block within his own kingdom. Did that mean he cared about them? Not necessarily, but he was nothing if not prudent, and they were still his subjects. Their well-being reflected on himself. A king of rats, thieves, marauders, and prostitutes was not but a jester. No, his land had to be the best, for he was the greatest of the daimyos and he would be seen as such. Toyotomi's musings were brought to an end when he felt a hand on his wrist and looked to see his wife. At her gaze, his mounting frustrations simmered down and left him with a simple huff as he fanned himself. Exalted daimyo and madam, we welcome you to Konoha's council. May we present the Sandame Hokage? Well, at least Konoha still remembered decorum. It wouldn't do for one of his main military forces to be a band of barbarians. Greetings daimyo-sama, how might we aid you? The landlord continued to fan himself before rising within one of the throne his men had brought for his wife and himself. That's what I'd like to know. It's not often that the Hyuga clan contacts me, even less so the head of the clan itself. I first thought it might have concerned the incident with those Kumo nin, but I was surprised to see that it involved a recent discovery your village has made. A discovery that has been claimed to be able to increase my status quite aptly. The cage straightened, and though Toyotomi wasn't quite sure why, he decided to assume it to be pride in his village. One would have to be blind not to see why. Konoha was the only village to win 2 of the 3 ninja wars, survive an attack from the Kyuubi multiple times, contain a large percentage of the strongest ninja, and hold the first hidden village title. Their efficiency had wrestled him quite the amount of revenue and reputation, especially seeing how the Wind Daimyo seemingly preferred Konoha to his own village. Hopefully, they would surprise him again. He always did love a nice spectacle. Daimyo-sama, I am Danzo Shimura, and it is I who first discovered the topic of discussion. Danzo? Oh, he remembered him. Though he did look a bit more ragged than before, perhaps from whatever the discovery was? Oh, and what exactly is this grand prospect you found? Not a prospect, sir, a blessing. Since when did Konoha follow any religion? Sure, some followed the monks' paths, but actual gods and blessings? How odd, at least this promised to be entertaining. Very well, show me this blessing of yours. I wish to see it in its entirety. The crippled man nodded before holding up his hand, and, nothing. Toyotomi was confused. Was this some form of jutsu? He looked at the clan heads, and they seemed wary, so he supposed something was going to happen. But what? Suddenly there was a loud crash as glass shattered from above. A dark figure descended into the room, its face obscured by a mask of golden straw, its skin pitch black with a slight sheen upon it. The creature was incredibly tall as well, looming over 7 feet of height, and while it stood on 2 legs, that's where its similarities to humans ended. Its form was twisted, hollow in some places, and web-like in others. Where its stomach should have been was not, but a sizable golden gem shaped like an upside-down spade. Its arms split at the elbows, giving both joints an additional arm to use. Then there were its wings, 2 large, onyx appendages with feathers that trembled with each movement as the sound of wind chimes filled the air. It was beautiful in some alien way, yet horrific in a human one. Was this some type of weapon his village had made? How fascinating. Quickly, the ninja council rose up as a particularly feral woman growled alongside her hound. Yet the creature seemed unfazed, staying in a kneeling position before the one-eyed speaker. So, is this the blessing you spoke of? No, Daimyo-sama. I believe the Hyuga requested that you bring one of your appraisers, as well as a smith? The lord nodded slowly, unsure of how this creature was to be valued and hesitant to send masters of their respective fields towards the being. Talent couldn't be so easily replaced after all. Still, he motioned the 2 men forward, the jeweler, a shrewd, wiry thing that seemed wary of the giant creature. On the other hand, the blacksmith was a tanned man from the mountains covered in scars and grizzled features, looking at the creature with interest as if wishing to take it apart and study it. Once he saw the 2 men, Danzo nodded resolutely and motioned for the winged machination to rise. It did so fluidly, a surprise given its metallic visage. The man then moved towards the creature and placed his sole hand onto the golden jewel that made up the majority of its abdomen. Then it sunk inside it. Toyotomi's eyebrows raised at that. It wasn't the craziest thing he had seen, not by far given the shinobi he hired for his festivals every year, but it was rather interesting. If these creatures could store things so easily as well as defend them, they could be an immense boon for his acquisitions. He might even keep a few in his throne room for his valuables. However, the daimyo's eyebrows rose to his hairline with what was then extracted from the gem. Is that an arm? He didn't blame his retainer for his surprise, as the small forearm that revealed itself seemed freshly severed, if the red flesh was anything to go by. He felt his wife clench his arm tighter, and he wrapped his fingers around her own absent-mindedly before squeezing gently, staring at the appendage with a macabre interest. This interest increased as the fingers upon the hand began to slowly twitch and wriggled to life as dull cracks of bone filled the air. The flesh bubbled, rippled, and finally settled as small incisions made themselves apparent. Then the incisions opened. Screams from the civilian council rose, shinobi tensed, and samurai reached for their trusty blades. Multiple maws opened along the length of the forearm, and in the center of the hand's palm lay a single, bulbous eye. It opened slowly, rolling from beneath as its half-lidded gaze strained and twitched. It was an abyss of darkness with a lone scarlet star in its center. The soul, red flare released minute embers that slowly faded amongst the midnight canvas, and the eyes settled for a tired gaze. Its orb slowly panned around the room, staring at all of the people, glancing over them, sparing none a second longer than any other. Then it settled upon his twin emerald orbs, and he felt himself grow entranced within its gaze, counting all the small flares the ominous flame-like orb released and watching as the darkness consumed them. Yet, when the eye moved from him, he came to the startling realization that it had not stared at him any longer than those before him. The mouths released small warbling sounds, and the eye blinked slowly as the crippled man raised the appendage in the air. As if spurred by the motion, the winged being then reached into its own gem and pulled what looked to be a vial of green liquid. A fruity smell filled the air, one Toyotomi remembered fondly as one of his favorites. A Kawano, *2. However, instead of consuming the vial itself, or Danzo ingesting it, The creature poured the substance into one of the many mouths along the forearm of the writhing limb. The result? A wave-like, verdant glow that filled the room along with the sound of small chitters as the remaining mouths began to sing. A large sound clanged onto the ground and echoed through the chamber. Before his very eyes, Toyotomi witnessed what might have been the largest emerald he had ever seen drop onto the tiled floor. As large as his head, clear as the sky, and glowing with a shimmering light. And now you see, a true miracle. Certainly, Toyotomi decided, a true miracle indeed. My little love, beautiful like your father, pure like the skies and stars above. A certain warmth came from hearing those words, eclipsed only by the gentle ministrations as fingers danced within his hair. Each hum of her voice caused the fervent sea in his heart to settle, calm, and lull as the pale celestial did the roaring waters. The smooth, scarlet curtain from above tickled his cheeks and drew silent giggles from within him, ones echoed by her own. Naruto had never felt so comfortable before, not even with father. An odd thought, but one he found himself agreeing with. Whether it was due to the harsh occurrences that continuously surrounded him or how utterly exhausted he felt, the boy found himself relaxing in the woman's grasp. At times, his closed eyes would drift open, hidden by his blonde lashes, but the woman would always smile knowingly at his gaze before lightly tapping his nose. It would scrunch lightly before he would relax again, peering through his veiled look to see the golden fields that surrounded them. The air was cool, the breeze enveloping him, raising his arms slightly in welcome, and twirling around the seated pair in an ornate canter amongst the plains. The boy began to drift off, his eyes became heavy, and his form slacked again. Yet before Morpheus took him, the woman spoke once more. The world you see before you has been promised. You need not worry about the future, for destiny's hold upon your form wanes by the day. Soon we'll be together in such form, one that was taken from us. No matter the cost, I will ensure that this paradise before us comes to pass, and we'll finally be together again. Until then, I will stay by your side, mottled though I am. Still, remember always, mother, father, and son, we will all be together. Finally, the woman leaned over him, and his eyes were met with two blistering orbs. A gaze of molten amber, burning amongst the midnight canvas. How ominous, yet the boy couldn't feel afraid. He simply let out a sigh of relief and closed his eyes one last time. For there was nothing to worry about, they'd be together again. Soon, shimmering eyes opened to darkness, a sudden change that elicited a small gasp from the boy. As if in reply, the blond youth found arms around his waist that squeezed him gently before relaxing once more. For a few seconds, Naruto felt confused, befuddled, disoriented, and all manners of odd emotions. However, this would soon be solved when the boy shimmied around to gaze at the person holding him. It was hard to make them out due to how dim it was in the room, but the long curtain of ebony hair and the soft platform underneath his form enlightened him to what was going on. A dream? A pout made its way onto his face. The overhanging reality that none of the events on the golden field had happened sent a small dart of melancholy deep into his heart. Yet as if having read his mind, Anata quickly responded with a small thrum. The boy looked down to see his left limb glowing with a dull scarlet light. A sensation was communicated, feelings of affirmation and expressions of love and care, burning the sorrow away. In their wake, only hope and faith remained, the tender warmth that was small yet stalwart. A bastion for the tired lad. Hushed sounds greeted his ears. The muffled chirps of birds from outside, the voiceless mumbles that surrounded him, all accented by another squeeze. Eri Ne was a hugger, that was for sure. The boy snuggled in deeper, content to revel in the feelings of warmth and safety that enveloped him, for he had come to know that it would not last forever. Atlas was many things. He was strong, indomitable, enduring, and a capable general in his brother's army. One thing he was not, though, was good with surprises. Sue him, on the battlefield, surprises often led to pain and an inordinate amount of casualties. So, when his daughters surprised him by presenting a small creature, one with hair the color of the sun, shimmering eyes, and an odd crimson arm, his muscles twitched with anticipation. Not that he could do much, holding up the sky and all. What exactly am I looking at here? Arethyia, his youngest and most childlike of his daughters, raised the small being a head higher, popping the boy right into his personal space. It's a Naruto. Naruto? Was it some type of yokai? He hadn't dealt with one of the Oriental factions for quite some time, but they were rather isolationist when he still was free of his burden. Had they changed in the last millennia? He doubted it. Gods rarely changed, they could hide their true nature, but their place as higher beings detested true transformation. How could one learn a lesson of which they need not bear any consequence? Who was to teach them to become better? Mortals? A pipe dream, if there ever was one. The only god whose ego could endure such was a goddess, his brother's eldest born, in fact. She had always been somewhat soft outside of conflict, likely taking such inclinations from her mother. Even still, the boy had an odd aura about him. It wasn't one of a warrior's, no, the boy was much too innocent for that. However, there was something that felt inhuman. Not quite monstrous, but it was on the tip of his tongue. Perhaps, no, he doubted he was of the elder race. His brother had done away with them long ago in a fit of childish frustration. Their so-called goddess gained Kronos' ire during the war with the gods. Atlas couldn't see how one of them could be here, at least not until his brother grew up and decided to undo his curse. Perhaps all this weight was getting to him. For his own sanity, Atlas decided to just label the boy as a monster and move on. His gaze rose to see his children, many of them like Aegle, waiting for his reaction, while Erythea simply moved the boy around. She raised his arms up and down in a parody of an actual dance, twirling the boy and nuzzling his face into her own. "Papa, can we keep him? Oh Lord, not again." Maybe banning men from Mount Othrys was a bad idea, but sue him, he knew what men wanted. Especially back in the olden days. Look at what happened with that little shit Hercules, it was just like one of Zeus's children to pull a stunt like that. Thinking of it only mounted his frustration before he let out a sigh. Far be it from him to judge another, as vexing as it was. There was a reason he was often called the general, and a general must thrive in all aspects of war. Erythea, you can't keep a, what did you call it again? Naruto. Right, a Naruto. Who knows what kind of diseases it could have. Believe it or not, monsters carried a lot of germs. Atlas had seen harpy flu, and it was not a pretty sight to behold. Atlas raised an eyebrow when he saw the boy send out a pout, the blonde's frustration marred by Erythea still raising the boy and making him dance. Odd, but it was slightly humorous for the old being. When there was only himself and his daughters, well, there was also that pissant Luke. Things got stale after a while. It could have been worse. The gods could have placed him somewhere his daughters couldn't reach him. That thought brought a pang of grief from within him. Calypso, his daughters had told him what had happened to her. She would be the first thing he fixed when this war was finally won. Perhaps then she could finally have a stable life and settle down with someone. His thoughts were again interrupted, but this time it wasn't by a question or something being shoved in his face. It was a light, or more accurately, a loss of light. The general looked towards the source and raised an eyebrow at the sight. The blond youth had his cheeks puffed out as he continued to chew, his body seemingly absorbing all light. He didn't catch a good look at it, but was that a pomegranate? As if things couldn't get weirder, the lack of light intensified before converging on the Naruto's back. What appeared next? A brick. Black bars darker than a moonless night, 1*. They absorbed light as if the void itself and were hard to gaze at without feeling his eyes throb in discomfort. Erythea continued to move the boy around, but one of his elder daughters, Hespera, picked up the smooth item and studied it idly. Then, without rhyme or reason, she turned and dropped it into her shadow. The rectangular objects disappeared from view, sinking into the ground within her silhouette without resistance. Then, Hespera stomped her right foot into the ground, and his senses tingled as an ebony barb sat before his nose, nearly cutting into his immortal flesh. He averted his gaze back to his daughter to see multiple black spires raised from the ground, their thorns shooting out wildly. Yet none of the bristles touched any of his other daughters, instead forming barriers in front of them. I'm not sure about diseases, but he has some rather interesting abilities. While the Titan found himself agreeing, he also found himself frowning at her tone. He knew what his daughter thought of him, of his past actions. She was vocal about them, but Hespera could not understand them, for she could not understand the world. How could she when she had never seen it? He had seen war with the gods, both the Olympians and the other pantheons. The coming war was the only way to stop this, to fix what had been broken by his brother's foolishness and the gods' pettiness. Her mind was closed to the truth, for her world contained her sisters and her sisters alone. But what about his other children? Should he allow Calypso to rot on that rock? Allow his other siblings to suffer? His duty wasn't to deem what was wrong or right. It wasn't to play the moral high ground nor play the role of justiciar. No, he was to protect his family. That was a general's only prerogative. To ensure his family's safety and make sure that his men would have a home to return to. Where Athena reigned in her cold logistics and Ares in his thirst for blood and violence, Atlas was one of needed pragmatism. With a sigh, the general nudged his head towards the boy, signaling that he wanted a closer look. In response, Erythea put the dizzy boy down and pat him lightly on the back, motioning him forward. The boy looked towards the large man with eyes full of wonder and intrigue, a look Atlas reflected a lesser degree. The Naruto made his way up to him and peered into his stone-gray eyes with two orbs that swirled with a myriad of colors. After a few seconds of silent contemplation, Atlas decided something. The boy was related to some form of god, whatever pantheon it might be. He wasn't sure if that made the boy a god, demigod, monster, or anything in between, but no mortal, blessings or not, could have a presence such as this. Tell me, Naruto, what exactly do you know about your ability? Still, what kind of general would Atlas be if he ignored a possible advantage hand delivered to him? 36. That was how many monsters Luke lost trying to defeat the Golden Beast, and they got nothing from it. They didn't find the monsters who had disappeared, though he now realized they had likely also been killed by some form of creature. More importantly, they still didn't know what the creature was. A monster? Some kind of scrap from Hephaestus? Had the Olympians caught onto them? There were so many questions, and yet the son of Hermes was no closer to an answer than he had been before the encounter. The scarred boy looked to see the remaining monsters wrench the harpy from the corpse of the metal beast. The avian was sleeping as if she hadn't been strangled and devoured an hour ago. A twinge of unease picked at his skin, twisting the small hairs on his forearm with malicious mirth and anticipation. The boy's head swung around to see their defeated adversary's form shrink back to that of a large ingot. Any damage they dealt to it was gone, leaving only a smooth surface ready for use once more. Boss, what should we do now? Luke didn't know, but there was one thing he was certain of. Barry, get the rest of the group. Don't touch the bar. Leave it. The plan continues forward. It's time to get to the Andromeda, so we'll just have to make do with our numbers. Still, as the boy spoke, the feeling of being watched stalked him outside the room. In the pits of his mind, a new fear was forming. There was another player in the game, and for the first time in years, Luke wasn't sure they could face them. A pull, and something extra below. 1 asterisk, Sutoka, stalking stock, metal. The metal melds with the user's shadow and will lash out either on mental command or with instinctual retaliation. While it is incredibly useful, it's weak to things that produce light, like fire or lightning. An odd quality is that any damage it inflicts on an enemy's shadow is reflected in the enemy's physical form. So, stabbing the throat of a shadow will cause a large incision on the victim's throat. One con to this metal is that the more metal added to the shadow, while increasing the amount and range of attack, will also slow the user exponentially for each bar added. The weight of death is not an easy thing to bear. Gaze. Beyond the realm of light. What are you watching? A twisted visage of malformed skin appeared before him. Some would retch or cry upon but a glance, but Yulxa had seen such things many times before. Why his brother would take the form of their lesser half-siblings was beyond him. Our little star has found another world, apparently. Well, that is to say, it's been watching the same world for a few millennia and has found a suitable consort for itself. Puvari grimaced at that, the idea of taking a soul vessel both uncomfortable and foreign to the being. With a menagerie of whispers, Yulxa was privy to his brother's form being swallowed by darkness and twisting to become something more suitable for his lineage. Mottled green skin became smooth chocolate, dark, silken hair flowed down his spine, and the hideous protruding bones retracted as the youth stood at full height. Puvari had become handsome, enchanting, as their worshippers often praised. The way his brother's eyes raked over his own form, he could tell that Puvari thought the same of him. Though he had gone with a paler skin tone and white hair, somewhat because so many of his siblings emulated their mother's features. Then again, even gods worshipped her, so he couldn't blame them. However, whether that worship be out of fear, desperation, or adoration was up for grabs. There was one issue Yulksa had with his brother's appearance. Puvari hadn't formed clothes when he changed. Hence his brother lay next to him naked as he studied the screen. Would it kill you to put some clothes on? Huh? Oh, I forgot about those. Why? I didn't even form genitals this time. It's the principle of the matter. You demean yourself by showing your form so willingly. Our visages are to be idolized and worshipped, not displayed for commoners. Puvari looked around them before shrugging. What commoners? Yulksa allowed his growing frustration to wane as he focused back on the screen, finally gaining a glimpse of the supposed consort. Huh, a blonde, who would have guessed? Usually, their half-sibling had a thing for creating redheads. He had assumed their type would have been the same. Not bad. The consort's got immortal blood flowing through him, but it doesn't seem like he's the sire of any actual gods. Might be some of those so-called Olympians. I'm surprised Father's heirs haven't wiped them out yet. They don't often tolerate insolence. Indeed, if the deities had cared for this realm, the false gods would have found themselves slain by their forces. Bound to stars, stricken by their children, or devoured by one of Father's feared god-eaters. The Olympians should simply be happy that Father was sleeping, or they'd be burned away all the same. You think Iskra will try to tempt his vessel? She's always had a thing for stealing worshippers away. Yulksa allowed a scowl to come to his face at that. He still had to pay their sister back for her past insolence. It'd be fun to see her try. Lightless the forge might be, but weak it is not. It'd be too much of a hassle to fight against it, at least for what would amount to a few years of fun. No, the bigger question is whether or not Mother will consume their realm soon. Pale ears twitched at the sound of a paddle ball being repeatedly hit and could only groan. His sibling's attention span was a thing to behold, truly. He wished more would adopt Father's practices, then, he wouldn't have to deal with so much idiocy. Such was the life of two brothers who lived within the abyss. It started off quietly, a murmur that reached his ears, a whisper and a caress to his senses. However, it would not stay as such, quickly growing into a chant and then a screech of fury. Scarlet tendrils grasped at the air in the darkness before him, growing barbs and moving with utmost precision towards their prey. A singular golden light glowing solemnly in the abyss. Yet as the shadows closed in, so too did the ember lower gently into a small pair of hands, taking solace in their presence. However, that only drove the horrid strands into a frenzy, causing them to tear through the air towards the young child who cradled the radiant speck. Their forms wrapped around the boy, slithering upon his legs and arms, eventually circling his face. Yet his flesh was not rent, but instead, the thorns kissed upon his skin, leaving no marks, only embracing him as he did the petite orb. And finally, the world seemed to still. As if at peace, the words quieted, and a feeling of wholeness tore away the cold grasp of death. He was safe here. He didn't need to worry. The first step. Take upon their blessing, flawed as it is. Dress yourself in robes of fool's gold and dance upon the alabaster that lines their halls. And soon, I will come and trace your form in rubies and ebony lace. Your hair shall be adorned with roses, and your flesh will bloom with their blood. Then, when the time is right, our crimson spear shall raise you before me. They will bear witness to our union, and the dreams shall be such no longer, but instead a tapestry to depict my adoration. For they shall rejoice upon the visage of our new dynasty. Suddenly, the peace that had taken place was replaced by a storm of cinders. Fire grasped at the observer's flesh, and ash filled his lungs. Unseen hands pulled his eyes shut, and shivers racked his fragile form. He could feel his body crack and his porcelain skin shift to the abyss's whims. The golden light that once stood resolute began to fray. Golden threads unraveled gracefully to expose a small shimmering fruit in the boy's palms. And then, as if the world hadn't just begun to blister and boil, the youth opened his lips and placed them upon the delicacy. Bite, flash, burn. What remained was a scarlet star shrouded in shifting umbra. A sole crimson eye opened beneath its rays. I am born. A pair of eyes snapped open, the young man's mouth soon following the motion. He couldn't breathe. As if his lungs had been left in that nightmarish world, the boy turned on his stomach and slammed his fist into his chest. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. Again. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. Desperation filled the boy, but one last slam into his form finally released the grasp of whatever withheld his air from him. A loud series of coughs filled the room, followed by an even louder breath. When the boy looked up, he was met with a dissipating cloud of smoke escaping from his chest. No, he was simply tired. He refused to believe such a dream held meaning. The boy's form was drenched in sweat, his body shivering and heaving in distress. The cold air grasped his neck harshly, proving itself no more forgiving than its antithesis. Still, the brown-haired youth forced himself up and onto the railing of his cabin. With a huff of exertion, the boy flung himself into the water and then waited for the feeling of comfort that was sure to follow. And it did, but it felt sluggish. It was as if the refreshing substance was forced to pry the grip of fear from his form. Yet, while late, the feeling did come, and Percy was relieved. The boy allowed the ocean water to grip him comfortingly, finally feeling at peace again. He wasn't sure how long he stayed underneath the waves, but eventually, the boy wrenched himself above his favorite place and jumped onto the sands surrounding his cabin. It was addicting, really, the power and sureness that came with being in his father's domain. Sometimes he feared it slightly, wondering if he would simply jump in and refuse to come out one day. That he might forget everyone and the trials they were forced to face here for the safety and security of the azure depths. It felt suddenly like a rock was stuck in his throat. Oh yes, the thought was very inviting, but he couldn't. Even with everything he had been through, the pain, fear, and frustration, he would never give up the friendships he made. He wouldn't be a coward, he wouldn't be a Gabe. A Gabe? A person had to be really bad for their name to be akin to a slur. He hadn't thought of that hairless walrus for a while. He'd have to visit his mom again, it might do him some good. As if answering his question, anxiety forced his muscles to tense, and his breathing quickened. Once again, the son of Poseidon fought against the ocean's allure. He needed to get out of here, busy himself, something. He was going stir-crazy, sitting around after such a big fight. Maybe he should go find Annabeth, even tell her about his dreams or something. He really just needed to talk to a friend now. So, with it, the demigod was off. He waved languidly to the naiads who had made their homes in the waves and the stray youths beginning to rise. It didn't take him long to find the big house, but he couldn't exactly remember why he had walked there in the first place. He had meant to go sit down and maybe wait for breakfast, yet here he was for one reason or another. That was an anomaly, and if he had learned anything from his blonde, jabber-jaw friend, anomalies were to be feared and treaded carefully. Something about war and all that. So, watching the doors cautiously, Percy decided to go and see whether or not Chiron was in, having returned from his unjust punishment. While the boy had wanted to speak to Annabeth, the teacher of heroes was a better ear than many. If anything was to be known about his dreams, the centaur likely had knowledge of it. He knocked slightly but received no answer. He waited for a second or two but eventually let himself in. It wasn't like the structure was exactly private or anything. So, with a confidence that only came with being a seasoned camper, the boy made his way through the doors, shuffling around any clutter that barred his path. Tantalus really did a number on this place. Indeed, he did, my dear boy, indeed he did. Whether because of how tired he was or simply because he quickly recognized the voice, the brown-haired youth didn't whirl around but instead slowly turned to see a familiar face. Chiron, hey, it's great to see you back. Tantalus was pretty weird? The centaur raised an eyebrow, seeing how Percy tried to say it as nicely as possible, before letting out a light chuckle. Yes, weird, well, I suppose that's one word for it. Since we haven't talked in a while, how about we chat? I heard someone went on a quest they shouldn't have. You can help clean up while you bring me up to speed. Percy laughed nervously at that before nodding his head and picking up a book off the floor. A certain rhythm was established between the two as Percy told him of all the crazy things that happened on the way to Polyphemus, the monsters they faced and eventually finding the Golden Fleece. Chiron would chuckle at times, bringing in coffee for the two to enjoy as they continued working. Coffee, not Percy's favorite, but he sipped on it if just to be polite. Also, because of how dead tired he was increasingly feeling. Percy, I'm glad to see you haven't changed in my absence. Still, perhaps you could do without being so reckless. I had hoped Annabeth would rub off on you slightly. The latter sentence brought a slight pink tint to the boy's cheeks, but he simply let out another nervous laugh and listened as his teacher continued. Percy, you know we'll need to speak about the prophecy soon, correct? That caused the mood to dampen slightly, the boy's shoulder tensing once again as he let out a shaky noise. Right, the prophecy, it seemed no matter what he did, some shadow was always looming over their heads. If Kronos wasn't enough, here came the possibility that he might somehow end the world. Do we have to talk about it right now? It seemed the teacher was about to say something, but he simply stopped and shook his head. No, I suppose we don't. After all, you haven't even been back for a week yet. I haven't even been back for long either. How about we both relax and enjoy ourselves until things ramp up again? Percy couldn't agree more, this was just what he needed. Just some time and someone to talk to. When the demigod was done, he'd have to look for Annabeth, maybe see if he could get Grover away from that tree nymph he was fawning over. Say what you would about the satyr, Grover recovered rather quickly from the marriage fiasco. A quiet series of knocks rang through the room, echoing in the silence the two had found comfort in. Following the noise were the creaks of an opening door and the sound of brushing wood. A girl with ebony hair and a dark leather jacket walked in. How she moved so silently in the boots she wore was a mystery to the cabin 2 dweller. The girl, Talia, that's what Annabeth had called her, looked at Chiron before her gaze met his own. Her expression, lethargic and confused, became skewed with a twinge of annoyance upon meeting his sea-green orbs. Percy couldn't help but slightly scowl as well. He had never done anything to her, so he didn't know why she acted like he spat in her food or something. Chiron, where's Annie? I need to speak with her. The centaur sighed at the tension that had entered the room before looking at the recently awakened girl and responding. She's probably getting ready for her day, or she might stay cooped up in her room for a while reading one of those books of hers. You know how she is. The girl's face scrunched further in frustration. Percy found himself rolling his eyes. What was with the attitude? It's not like they had anything to do with it. You got a problem, seaweed boy? Usually, Percy would answer with some witty comeback, but he honestly couldn't find it in himself. He was still tired, still reeling from the constant stream of nightmares that seemed to become more realistic with each horrific experience. So instead, he made a rather Athena-like move and simply scoffed before he continued cleaning. Talia's face began to glow red with her mounting frustration as a growl rang through the room, and small sparks started to expel from her form. However, a sigh would ring between the two demigods when Chiron pinched the bridge of his nose and looked at the two frustrated youths. Must the two of you act like your fathers? Can't you get along? Don't compare me to him, the goth scowled. On the other hand, Percy simply slumped, giving a small dismissive wave of his hand. The idea of relaxing in the big house was a bust. It started off good, but Tree Girl had to bring her drama with her. Still, the girl seemed to be really close to Annabeth, given the nickname she used, so it wouldn't do to be hostile with her. On another day, Percy might have extended an olive branch to the daughter of Zeus, but today he would simply nod and turn to mind his own business. He could almost feel Talia's gaze turned to him with a raised eyebrow, but he ignored it, hoping to finish cleaning and leave. Maybe he'd take a nap. If he was lucky, the nightmares might only come at night. Even as a son of Poseidon, he wouldn't hold his breath. It took a while longer, but for whatever reason, Talia assisted in cleaning. The room never quite returned to the pleasant atmosphere it once had, but it was better than what it was moments ago. The trio had finished cleaning what they could before the call for breakfast, the rest, they'd have to do it another time. Percy watched as tiny particles of dust danced in the sun's rays from the windows above, and as he felt a few drift close to his face, he wrinkled his nose. Yeah, this place needed a good dusting. Well, kelp head, let's get out of here. Besides, you probably know Annabeth's hangouts better than I do now. Percy almost reacted negatively to her comment, but the forlorn undertone stayed his hand. Instead, he let out a small yawn and nodded before moving to exit the house. The smile of a happy centaur radiating onto their backs, whether for their help or their temporary truce unknown. However, as the two opened the doors to leave the big house, they were met with an odd sight. Instead of an open field and the sounds of clamoring echoing from the pavilion, they found the scenes reversed. Instead, the field was crowded with confused and inquiring faces. Not a single soul was located in the designated eating area. In fact, even the nymphs, satyrs, and harpies were there. Percy couldn't help but wonder why they still had harpies. They only ever threatened to eat the campers. What's the holdup, you two? I'm surprised you're not. Oh? What's this? Chiron's presence made itself known as he looked at all of the confused faces below him. They had already thrown the horseman a party when he first returned, so why were they here now? Chiron, sir, didn't you call us? Percy saw the teacher of heroes raise an eyebrow and couldn't help but raise his own. When would their teacher have had the chance to call everyone? He had been cleaning the whole time with Talia and himself. No, I don't believe I did. I've been with Percy and Talia here. There must be some misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding. You've all been called to bear witness to a prophecy. The quick response of shock was only preceded by the three closest to the voice whirling around to face it. It was the oracle? We've just had a prophecy. Isn't it too soon? Percy heard the voice that whispered in the crowd and couldn't help but agree. What was it this time? This prophecy isn't new. It's always been, but the lines were marred and hidden by the three-eyed watcher. No, this prophecy supersedes even yours, children of the Great Three. Percy heard the murmuring of his campmates continue to increase in number. He also felt the ebony-haired girl next to him tense and clench her teeth. But his focus was on something else. The oracle sounded odd. First watching the child of Zeus, its eyes snapped to his form, its rotten lips lifting in mockery of a smile. Percy could see it now, the small, almost unnoticeable, maroon veins that stretched from her eye sockets. However, his eyes were drawn more to the eyes themselves, two burning coals for orbs, smoking as the mottled flesh around them slowly scorched and blistered. I am born. Percy's eyes snapped open in astonishment as the words were spoken by Delphi. What? It's spoken to you, hasn't it? Even now, it whispers to you. After all, I was not the one who spoke such words. Percy could only look at the speaking corpse in shock, not knowing how to respond, but it seemed like the choice would be taken from him. Sea-green eyes opened in shock, and the boy fell to one knee as his chest clenched and his lungs were wrested from his control. A dull burning filled his mouth as ash began to spill out, so painful was it that he could barely feel the touch of a blonde girl who rushed to his side. He couldn't hear the frantic screams of his friends or the yells of their camp director, but he could hear her voice clear as day. Allow me to tell you the prophecy, child, for it would be cruel to be so unaware of the fate seized from you. The woman's mouth only stretched further in a sardonic grimace if it was possible.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.